Get peppy. Welcome to PEP 173. That's PEP or Planet Extra podcast. It's an offshoot of Planet America on ABC Australia, which you can see on Wednesdays at 10 p.m, also 9:30 p.m. on ABC TV, and 8 p.m. on Fridays on ABC News, or anytime you like on iView or Facebook at ABC Planet America, or on YouTube on the ABC News In-Depth channel. On PEP, we cover all the stuff that's too nerdy for TV. If you're listening to us, you can also find PEP on YouTube and Facebook, where you'll also find timestamps and show notes in the blurb. And if you leave a comment under those videos, we're likely to see it. You can also tweet us at PEPCHASDRDAVE. That's at PepChaz Dr. Dave. If you want to contact me privately, ask me on Twitter. I'll allow you to direct message or email me, or you can contact me directly on Facebook. But for now, let's welcome back Culture Vulture for the stars and international columnist of great repute, guest podcaster Bill Wyman.
Good afternoon, Chaz. Thank you so much for having me here again.
It is an absolute pleasure, Bill. Thank you so much for this surprise PEPcast. 173 didn't tell anyone this was coming, except for you, Bill.
I was informed.
Yes, thank God. Otherwise, this would be a little bit awkward. The time is currently 3:31 p.m. on Tuesday. I don't know if it's going to go up tonight. I'm still trying to prepare the Planet America for tomorrow, so we'll see if I can squeeze it in. Otherwise, I'll put it up tomorrow. And the Dave podcast will either be, if I put this up tonight, next Dave podcast will be on Friday. If I put this up on Wednesday, the next Dave podcast will be on Saturday, just so you know. But I am, as always, 48 hours behind. So you're going to be carrying us for everything that's very recent. Bill.
Absolutely.
But in the meantime, what are you grateful for?
Oh, what am I grateful for? Oh, my God, Chaz, we talked about this. I have two things that I'm grateful for. One is, I don't know if you know this. Obviously, you know that I'm American. I moved here about 5 years ago.
Oh, I can't believe it.
And my wife lived here long before I knew her and had citizenship, which is my route coming here. And on Sunday, I got citizenship.
You're an Australian.
I went through a ceremony in the Blue Mountains with the mayor of the Blue Mountains and the local member, and it was so heartwarming and touching. I can't even tell you.
Does this make you a dual citizen, or have you actually renounced your American?
I have not renounced my American citizenship. I don't know if I need to do that.
That's a good move.
And but I really am grateful to Australia. People have been here so welcoming. We had a network of friends here, all of whom were so supportive. And I'm also grateful. So, I just want to thank all of Australia. Everyone's been so welcoming, and it was very moving to become a citizen. And I'm also grateful for the ABC, actually, because I was looking something up, and I don't know if you know this, but long before I'd ever been to Australia, I was a guest on Philip Adams's show a couple times. They just found me out of the blue because of articles I'd written, and so I guested on that a couple times. And when I first visited Australia, which was more than 10 years ago, just visiting, I got to go up and see him do one of his shows, which is very exciting, at 10 o'clock at night in this magnificent building. It was such a memorable experience. And so obviously I've been on the drum and stuff like this, and I felt very welcome at the ABC as well. So thank you very much.
Oh, very nice. It's, I'll accept that appreciation on behalf of the network. Unlike Dave, today I'm speaking, no, not today. For this moment, I'm speaking on behalf of the ABC. You're welcome. I'm now no longer speaking on behalf of the ABC. Okay, well, that's really nice.
And what are you grateful for?
Well, I'm grateful for, I've had a real Olympic theme recently because I'm into sports, especially late night sports. Sports that are on at 4 a.m., they're right in my zone. So the Olympics have been very good to me. And what I'm grateful for is I spoke at length about how much I loved handball, European handball, a few weeks back.
Oh, exactly. I've been following that.
It's good,
with
isn't
alacrity. Yes,
it's good.
Your history with handball, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Norway, the Norway girls, they did themselves proud.
You could have been the RayGun of your era.
Well, we're going to get to that. A lot of peppers have drawn the connection between me and RayGun. But I now have a second sport that I love. I mean, I love lots of sports, but almost as much as handball. This is a second favorite sport, which I hadn't watched before, but I watched during these Olympics, and I just loved it, which was the climbing. I'm obsessed with the climbing. Did you watch any of that?
I watched a little bit of it. It's very impressive.
Incredible, especially the lead climbing, where they're basically hanging just down, like pull themselves up by their arms. It's just incredible. Yeah. Like I couldn't get enough of that. Like especially once again the women, the female climbers, I just loved watching. I couldn't get enough of it. So I'm very grateful for now. There's two sports I can obsess about. A lot of peppers have made the connection that you made to the breakdancing. I happened to watch RayGun live because it was on late at night when I have it on in. I think I was editing PEP at the time actually. Had it just in a little corner of the screen. And Avis said what many people said. Speaking of handball, your Olympic hopes are not over yet. I'm sure if you try hard enough, you can make the Olympic breakdancing. And look, I'm not going to lie. I did think about it. When I was watching RayGun, I was thinking, I wonder if I can do this. I mean, I'm starting to pull some hammies these days, but I wonder I can kangaroo hop. I can do that.
And so what did you think of her when you saw her?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I wasn't watching her thinking, oh, she's particularly hilarious. I was just thinking, this sport's ridiculous. Like, this is not an Olympic sport. And I wasn't just watching her. I was watching lots of them. I mean, she was not as good as some of the others. I don't know why people got so angry about her. Why were people getting so angry? Tell me were you angry?
No, I wasn't angry, but I have just a little bit of insight that might help.
Tell us why people are angry.
That just in the coverage I don't see enough. What?
She was doing her best.
Right, and the issue here was that, I mean, I'm not going to get into a lot of the comments about some of which was justified and some of which weren't. But the issue that was polarizing is that, again, breakdancing came out of a specific cultural milieu, right? An African-American community, poor areas of New York and stuff like that. Yeah. And it's obviously associated with African-American culture in America. And there is some sensitivities about cultural appropriation. You've always had this issue with people like Vanilla Ice, white rappers, and you have Eminem, and there's always been some questions about whites coming in and expropriating black culture and then making a lot of money out of it. And you can get into that debate all the livelong day. But there is some extraordinary breakdancing, and it's been part of American culture now for, 30-something years,
sure.
Right? And the picture of just to put it in very bald terms, of a white woman, a privileged academic, coming in there and doing little bunny hops and
kangaroo hop,
basically being... I think it's fair to say that she wasn't a very good breakdancer, okay? And I think that is just a little bit, that kind of fueled a lot of it, that not only was it cultural appropriation, it was ridiculous, completely unrespectful of the form, and executed poorly. And I just think that fueled a little bit, which I think is justified. Yeah. I think if you are going to go into this cultural thing that you have no cultural history in, you need to kind of show respect, mastery, some sort of conversation with it, as opposed to looking ridiculous. And again, that's nothing against her. I'm just explaining from the American point of view what fueled a little bit of
Fair enough. What I would say is, in terms of the cultural appropriation, literally every single person there who wasn't African American was culturally appropriating it. Oh,
absolutely.
Like a Japanese person is not the original person, original culture that did breakdancing either.
Right, but it's just it's a complex interaction. Yeah. She didn't seem to be.
Absolutely.
But I just want to make clear to her, because I have a friend back home who's a professor who's a roller derby expert. Yeah, she's a Jane Austen expert on Jane Austen, but she also does roller derby, and she calls herself Stone Cold Jane Austen. Sure. And so I understand that whole thing, like being a professor, participating in that, which I think is great, and I'd love to meet her. But that's just what fueled it.
No, that's fair enough. I was going to say, she clearly loves the form. She's dedicated her life to it. Like, she obviously has her heart in the right place. But she wasn't great. I actually feel like part of her problem was her costume. Like, she looked like Ricky Ponting in a one-day international from 1998. Like, I don't know why they dressed her up like that. But anyway, I mean, she wasn't very good. But anyway, she had a go. Good on her. I'm not going to do it. I can't do it. They've banned. Then it's not going to be in the LA Olympics. That's it. So it's not going to be back. So anyway, but let me tell you, by the way, why I thought it was a rubbish sport. I'm not talking about her, and I'm not talking about the form. Like, the form of breakdancing is fantastic, obviously. And if you look at the people who are good at it, the gold medalist was incredible, right? Like, I'm not saying it's not a feat of skill. What I'm saying, from an Olympic sport, you can, Peppers can correct me, you can correct me if you want. My theory is, what you want for a good Olympic sport is the illusion of objectivity. not actual objectivity. You want the illusion of objectivity. You want to say this person is the fastest person in the world. This person is the best gymnast in the world. This person is, or this team is the best at X in the world. Now, there are heaps of sports already that don't have objectivity in the Olympics, like gymnastics, like diving, like boxing. Like a lot of them are subjective. There are judges' scores, right? But they at least have the illusion of objectivity, where there is allegedly scoring sheets, and there are different things are worth different amounts, and people give scores out of 10, like 8.7 or whatever, and you can convince yourself, if you're willing to suspend your disbelief, to go, okay, no, that gymnast there who just got 8.7 actually did a better routine than that gymnast who got 8.6. Even though in reality there's so much subjectivity, you can convince yourself it's objective. Then with breakdancing, their scoring system was just ridiculous. It was just someone goes either I like you or I like you. And then they just had 9 judges saying that. It was just not even close to objective. It was just so subjective. So at the end of it, you just go, well, this doesn't feel like an actual competition. It just feels like a demonstration of skills, and then they just flip a coin to see who's going to win. In the case of RayGun, obviously that's not the case. But in the case of, like, when there's 2 good breakdancers, you go, there is no way that they are telling these 2 breakdancers apart from any kind of respectable system. And that to me made it feel like not really an Olympic sport. That's my take.
Yeah, I can see that.
Anyway, this is not a RayGun podcast. Let's keep on going. Correspondence. Talking about handball, not European handball, the other kind. We bravely took on a national linguistic survey last PEP, about handball. There are 4 squares, and those squares, I grew up to think they were called king, queen, jack, and dunce.
Oh, that's what you guys were talking about last week.
That's what we were talking about.
Yeah.
But we had a pepper calling for a national survey because they said I grew up with ace, king, queen, and dunce. And so I put it out to the peppers, and it's interesting results. I've got them for you here. These were, okay, we've got 2 Southeast Queensland. These are the ace, king, queen, dunce people. 2 Southeast Queenslanders, Ipswich, Gladstone, Gold Coast, Brisbane. So that's all Queensland. So clearly Queensland is ace, king, queen, dunce. 4 from the ACT, all ace, king, queen, dunce. But then there were 1 or 2 isolated people in various places, which made me think that they might be one-offs. Like there was 1 in Western Sydney, 1 on the New South Wales-Victorian border, 1 in New South Wales, 1 in Western Australia, 1 in Victoria. And then the king, queen, jack dunces there was 1 in Central Queensland, but then there are a bunch in Victoria, a bunch in Adelaide, a bunch in Western Australia, and a bunch in New South Wales. So I'm thinking, I might be wrong here, but if we can generalise, I think ace, king, queen, dunce might be an ACT and Queensland thing generally, whereas king, queen, jack, dunce is the rest of Australia. Generally speaking, there are obviously exceptions. But Spandex Ballet added, coming from Southern Tassie, when we're in public schools, it was ace, king, queen, jack, not dunce. Interesting. But there are occasional differences at higher private schools. Higher, that's an interesting adjective you use there. At private schools where it would be king, queen, jack, and dunce. So there we go. Maybe it's a private school, public school thing in some areas.
Interesting.
There was agreement, however. There was no question that they were called potato cakes, not scallops or fritters. That's an ongoing Australian battle, that one. And Dodge Stredger said we had box ball or foursquare. So they also call it box ball, which I'd never heard before, or foursquare, and we called it president, vice president, secretary, and asshole. I'm not sure I believe this.
That's hilarious.
I'm not sure I believe this, but if that's true, that's amazing. That would be amazing if you literally, as like six-year-olds had a square called asshole. That would be amazing. Anyway, and Nick suggests handball on the ground is called foursquare in WA, but downball in Victoria. Downball or box ball, which is really interesting. Also, along with what I was saying, in Queensland, we had endless Queenslanders saying, yes, school bags are called port. all through Queensland, up and down Queensland. Queensland's everywhere. We're saying, yes, school bags are called ports, and the place where you put your school bag is called a port rack. Regional New South Wales said that as well. But my favourite was Sarah said, I can confirm ports in North Queensland and buy jingos. I thought no one was going to confirm buy jingos, but yes, in North Queensland, I had someone else. I'm not crazy, Dave. Dave thought I was just making it up. No, someone from North Queensland has confirmed they call their ice block / paddle pop / ice lolly, whatever you want to call it, buy jingos.
Buy jingos.
In North Queensland. So there you go. And my favourite part is I'll read the sentence. Can confirm buy jingo and ports in North Queensland, eh?
Aye.
I don't know. Have you been to North Queensland?
No, not yet.
Every sentence ends with A.
Aye. Yeah.
Aye. I grew up in the town of Ayr, another cane cutting town. She should have put I at the end of that as well. I love the I. I love it. And I love the confirmation. Thank you, Sarah.
I would like to compliment you when talking about language issues to not base on anecdotal your own thing, but actually take a survey and survey people and find out and just convey the information. That's something a lot of people don't do.
PEP has never been more scientific. I'm pleased about that. Live PEP correspondence. Matthew asks, have you ever considered doing a live PEP at any point? Election night would be the perfect time to do it. Just saying, election night would actually be the worst time to do it because we're going to do a live TV show on election night.
Oh, right.
Because remember, my day job is actually Plunket America host, and we're definitely going live on election night. But yeah, maybe one day. Would you do a live PEP?
Oh my God, I love it. I helped out with the last election at the ABC. It was so much fun with Stan Grant and the people. So I love stuff like that.
It won't be an election, but it'll be something.
It's going to be a brain-frying election, whatever happens.
I'm sure of that. Right to repair correspondence. The drunk monk says, Chaz, I've been watching for months and I've never been perplexed by anything you said until the moment you said right to repair isn't left. It's very left, the drunk monk says. Right to repair is a reaction to corporations telling consumers what to do with the property that they bought and now own. The politicians who fight for right to repair are almost all lefties, and those who oppose it are usually conservative. Ryan the pleb agrees, Bas Liberators agrees, Justin Accurate agrees, Watchtings also agrees and adds, right to repair is very much about imposing government regulations on businesses to prevent them creating and selling their product in their preferred way. Right to repair as a current issue is as much about requiring business to design their products in a certain consumer-friendly way as it is about removing restrictions on what consumers can do with their product once purchased. It may not be a left issue, but it's much more commonly aligned with left values than those of the right. Yeah, you guys are right. So I screwed up.
It's really infuriating because it even comes down to things like I remember when I lost the key to my Prius. It cost $500 to get a new key, which is just ridiculous. And they stop you. It's something that should cost $30. So,
well, like I said when I was responding by text, I think I just had it in my brain. I was thinking that it wasn't left because I've never read about that in a left-wing publication. I just constantly read about it in Reason. And
that's a good point.
But yeah, there are left-wing libertarians like me. It's like, so,
of course,
yeah.
And also there's also a thing that the right is traditionally bad on tech issues generally. It's uncool on the right. There's a lot of people who don't really understand things. Not that the left is all that good. I mean, when we come to politicians, but there are huge issues like the that Republican politicians have always embarrassed themselves talking about things like the internet and stuff like that. And on the left, they're a little bit more savvy. So
sure. Finally, I'm keeping the correspondences short these days. Finally, for the correspondence for now, we've got Falconing correspondence, referring to RFK, of course.
That was such a great segment.
Thank you. Achtung says, when they upgraded the River Plate Stadium in Buenos Aires, the grass part was so important and complex that for a couple of weeks they kept a team of falconers to ward off other birds like pigeons, who are a plague in the city, and rats as well, a plague everywhere. Falconing's still being done all over the world, and it's not just a crazy elitist sport. There's still a lot of reasons to keep the practice up. So it turns out, Bill, RFK is a man of the people, just very different people.
So true. It's one of the all-time craziest.
That's a great story. It really was. As for the bear meat, I was going, well, why does he why does he need just this tiny bit of bear meat? Like, because it's such a small bear.
It was a small bear.
Yeah. Scott says RFK apparently said he wanted the roadkill bear meat, not for himself, but to feed his pet ravens. That's why. Ravens like bear meat, apparently. And G-Rath backs that up. Nothing makes more sense than RFK Jr. picking up roadkill. The man has a long history of picking up dead animals either for food for his falcon, I think you mean raven, or just leaving it in the fridge of friends he'd been staying with. I'd highly recommend the Behind the Bastards episodes on RFK Jr. for the details and receipts. Now, I haven't checked up on that, but I trust G-Rath. I reckon Behind the Bastards sounds like it's well worth listening to.
Yeah. Did you read the Claire Malone story in the New Yorker about RFK Jr.?
This is the
big profile. From
yes,
last
I
week.
did. Yeah.
It's funny because this is a long time ago now, but there was a journalist who went crazy later, David Horowitz, and he did a famous book, 80s, 90s, called The Kennedys, that was basically about what they called the cousins. So RFK's generation, which because they propagated so much, there's like 50 of them. I think RFK is one of like 11 kids, I think, RFK alone. Yeah. Though I guess JFK only had, 3 or 2? I don't know. And it's a very, very bleak book. That's the one that detailed his heroin use. He had they went over this in the New Yorker story, and I just wanted to mention that it's one of those books that was famous at the time, and it kind of seared the image of particularly RFK Jr. into the minds of a whole generation of American political people like me, or interested in politics, because the whole thing she mentioned, there was some older friend of his father's who kind of glommed onto him and his brother and kind of got involved in heroin with them, but he was probably a half or to a full generation older than them. So it was a very kind of disturbing thing where this guy basically gave his life over to following these 2 Kennedy scions around, getting hooked on heroin and coming to a bad end. It's a bleak story.
Is it worth a read?
Well, it's a very famous book. Yeah, The Kennedys. It was just a very enterprising, saying, "Hey, I'm going to take a look at all these."
Yeah.
And to this day, that family, there's so many of them, so it's unfair in a way to point fingers. But I remember when I was in D.C. one night, there was a guy named Patrick Kennedy who knew. He was a representative from Rhode Island, of all places, right? And and so one night, 3 a.m, he's high on something and drunk with pills. He runs his car into one of the concrete barriers at the U.S. Capitol. Okay, now, what do you think would have happened to a young African-American man from the southeast side of Washington, D.C., if he ran his car into the concrete barriers of the Capitol at 2 a.m.? It wouldn't have been nice.
No.
But, I want you to know, though, that they took Patrick out of that car and they gave him a stern talking to him before sending him home.
I hope he learns a lesson. There's obviously a missing topic here, which is crypto. I just knew as soon as we started talking about crypto last week that the feedback was going to fly in, and it has, although not as much as I thought. And by the way, all the crypto people who are annoyed at what Dave said, you were very polite. I really appreciate that. I was expecting to just get buried. But I was really dreading looking at the comments this week, but you guys were very nice. So thank you for that. I'm going to save them for when Dave's here because I feel like I'm talking behind his back if I don't. So let's move on. Bill, I'm going to start with you just catching up, okay? Because we text each other a bit and you've been texting me a lot over the last few weeks going, I have a lot to say about Biden. I've got a lot to say about Harris. Well, why don't we just, rather than just talk about this week's stuff immediately, let's catch up. First, Biden and Pelosi and the rise of Harris. Just talk us through your takes on some of those.
Oh, sure. Just a little bit. There's some really interesting things. I have something of a disagreement with Dr. Dave.
Sure.
Because he gave Biden
associate professor. Let's not give him a tongue bath.
He took Biden to task a couple of weeks. I think it was 2 episodes ago now, and he said he wasn't that good of a president and
wasn't consequential. I think.
Yeah. And I just wanted to give just a little bit of context to this. Okay, that Biden always was a buffoon / menace. Okay, he was one of those guys. He ran for president several times. He basically embarrassed himself. He kind of plagiarized a speech. It wasn't quite fair, but he got kind of tagged for that. He was one of those guys who he's a senator for Christ's sake, and he still has to embellish. He'd say, "Oh, I was at the top of my class," or "Oh, I did." He was one of those guys who took what he did and he kind of took it up half a notch or a full notch, and he justifiably got spanked for that. Now, of course, we all know about his personal history, right? He got elected at a very young age. He lost his wife and one of his kids in a terrible accident. His career was marked by tragedy, and but he did do a couple of exceptional things. He was head of the Judiciary Committee of the Senate, and he was head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And for the most part, chair people of those commissions, they're pretty substantive people. I mean, we all laugh at these politicians, and God knows there's a lot of Shirley Jackson Lees and Marjorie Taylor Greens and stuff like that. But they're not. A lot of these people aren't unsubstantive, okay? And you don't get to hold those positions unless you're a very serious person. Now, that said, he was also one of the people who was very consequential with the confirmation of Justice Clarence Thomas in a very, very bad way, which I'm sure your listeners know about. So I just want to make clear that in sort of the American political class, he was a very, very flawed figure. Okay. That said, he was a very long-term senator, and he had done some very serious things. And again, particularly in foreign relations, you're in a very, very senior position, and you're really dealing with American security on an extraordinarily high level. And just as an aside, you know how Trump always says, "Oh, that was bad for America. America got a bad deal. People are taking advantage of America." That doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Okay? I'm really sorry. Like, America doesn't do anything that isn't good for America.
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous. Like, sometimes when I think about this, I go, what has America done that hasn't been? Now, America has made mistakes, like the war in Iraq and stuff like that, but it doesn't kind of go, "Oh, we'll just give a bunch of money to the EU," or, "Oh, we'll just do a bunch of stuff like this." It's all in America's best interest. And you have to remember on just basic things like when Trump rails against NATO, that when you have NATO and you have the EU, you have an enormous market for American goods. You have a lack of wars and conflict, and it's just really good for people. And so all these people in America who whine about this stuff, they need to look around at the quality of life in America is really extraordinary, even for a lot of poor people. Okay. And it's all because of stuff like that. Okay. All that said, he was a really good president. He did take on Trump. It's possible, looking back, that maybe someone else could have taken him on, but he did win with a coherent plan, and he won. And obviously, the things Dave mentioned, he got all these. He passed the Inflation Reduction Act, the American Recovery Act, all that stuff, the CHIP Act, and I think we have to understand that it's very hard to get these things done. That there are politicians who set their mind to it and get it done. Sometimes it's messy, like with Bill Clinton and Obama, and this actually wasn't even very messy.
Yeah.
Like, Obama passed the ACA and just got spanked in the next election, the next two elections, really, or the Democratic Party did. And you have to give him credit for getting those things done relatively painlessly for the party. And then particularly on foreign policy, you really can't expect him to do anything other than what he did when it came to Israel. Israel's had America over a barrel in various different ways for a really long time. I was researching this last week, and I was going through the Bob Woodward books on Obama, and I thought, oh, those will give me some really good insight into how Obama dealt with Israel, because Obama had real issues with Israel and really tried to rein them in as much as they could. The word Israel, I don't think it appears in either of the Bob Woodward books on Obama's presidency.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing? So, and that's because that's an example of the tension. So you can't expect Biden to have done more than he did with Israel, and he's doing his best, I think. And of course, what he did with Ukraine has just been exceptional. So it's surprising my own personal respect for him, just because I've always thought he was something of a schmo. But I did accept the analysis of his campaign that he was someone who could win in the upper Midwest. Okay, so that's my case for Biden.
That's fair enough. That's fair enough. Thank you very much for that. Well, what are your thoughts about Harris taking over before we get into the ins and outs of?
And I would like to repeat myself in the sense that Harris was a very disappointing person, right? I mean, she ran a bad campaign. We've talked about this before, and as we've also talked before, that her first year in office was marked by disorganization in her camp. In her campaign camp, and also in her office. And that's one of those things that make my skin crawl. And there are people who are a little bit disorganized, like Clinton. Bill Clinton, I don't know if I mentioned this the last time, but he was the kind of guy who'd hold a meeting and be playing bridge and be doing a crossword puzzle and show up for the meeting 2 hours late. Okay, but he was a very serious operation, had very serious people working for him. Obama obviously was a lot more disciplined, but it makes my skin crawl. Bad administration and bad management is something that really scares me. Okay. So I have never been a fan of hers, but let me tell you, running for office in America, it's the hardest thing in the world to become president of the United States, period. It's just, and there was this huge aircraft carrier, the USS Joe Biden, and it was cruising at 3 knots an hour in one direction. And while no one was looking, they had that whole thing mapped out, and they threw him overboard, and everyone stepped into position, and they started turning the thing around. It's just, I think history will look back on that. It still hasn't been written how exactly they did that, but you would have expected complete chaos. It's been amazing, and as long as they don't screw up the convention, it's going to be one of the most masterful exercises of American political power in recent history.
It has been very precise. You told me off air that you wanted to say something about Pelosi. I feel like this is where that fits.
Oh yeah, and just there's going to be really amazing histories of these written. It is just it's really. It's kind of funny because we just go through this and oh yeah, that was interesting when she said that, but this is almost like a Godfather level type thing that went on. And Nancy Pelosi did some amazing thing. There's been a couple of interviews with her afterwards, because if you remember, the key thing that happened about 10 days, I think, before Biden stepped out of the race, that Nancy Pelosi went on CNN and said, he needs to make a decision.
Oh, hang on. I just need to correct you slightly there, because it's actually an important correction. She didn't go on CNN. She went on Morning Joe.
Oh, Morning Joe, forgive me.
Which is Biden's favorite show. Because I'm sure that was intentional. She could have gone anywhere. She chose to turn up. This is just
right.
For those who don't remember, things were starting to die down. It looked like Biden had seen off the challenge. People were starting to give up. There was starting to be some mutterings about, well, what are you going to do? And then the next day, Nancy Pelosi showed up on Joe Biden's favorite show and said, 3 times in a row, when people were saying, well, he's decided he's going to stay. He's just going to make up his mind. Whatever his mind is, we're going to respect. And but he's decided to stay. Yeah, well.
He needs to make a decision.
He needs to make a decision. And she couldn't have been more blatant while at the same time subtle on Joe Biden's favorite show, just staring him in the face, just telling him, I'm not going away.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I forget if we talked about this last time I was here, but I just think that the one thing that people tend to forget during this, it isn't just that he did a bad debate performance. Okay. It was that it was really clear that he wasn't, and it was also clear, some people mentioned this, that it was clear he wasn't able to pursue a campaign effectively if we were worried about him doing that. But I think even beyond that, and I forget if I said this last time, but when I went back and watched it again, you wouldn't let him watch your dog while you were away for overnight. Would you let that guy, if he said, hey, Chaz, you're going away for a night, I'll stay at your house and I'll watch your dog for you?
Not my dog. My dog's very precious.
No, but and literally, would you let that, you'd think that's a guy who could lose the keys, drop his phone, let the dog get out. He wouldn't be able to chase the dog if something happened. And that's the even more serious thing that people were saying, look, if you don't want to leave the campaign, we'll talk about you leaving the presidency. So I think that was I think that's what drove people. And in a way, I think history will say it was very responsible, because we do have an issue right now where we have a president who, it's entirely possible if there's a huge crisis, he might not be in compos mentis right now, in all honesty. Okay. Now, he's an incredibly brilliant guy. Honestly, he's handled all these foreign affair things with alacrity, and he's really smart, and he cares about America and American power. But still, I still think that's a big vulnerability.
But you know what the good thing is? The good thing is that because of the last 3 weeks or 4 weeks, Kamala Harris has not only gained confidence, clearly, but America has gained confidence in her.
Yeah.
If Biden just completely just fell to pieces during a crisis, I think people would be happy with her taking over.
Yeah.
I think if this happened 2 months ago and something went wrong, people would dread the idea of Kamala Harris having control. But I think at this point in time, I think even Republicans don't like her very much, would be saying, well, she's not a complete joke. She at least, she's shown that she can do more than we thought she could do.
Yeah, she's done very well.
Yeah,
and so I only wanted to point out with Pelosi is a couple delectable little issues.
Please.
So there was one article in the New York Times where detailing the pressure on Biden. And so there was a meeting with Pelosi and Biden was apparently saying, oh, we've got these polls that say I can do well. And Pelosi, and according to the Times, said, get Donald on the phone. That's his pollster.
Yeah.
Meaning, call him right now.
Yeah.
Let's talk about his numbers.
Yeah.
And then she actually, in later interviews, denied she said that. Okay. And so it's interesting because the Times didn't say, according to someone who was there, it said, this is what she said, which is a subtle thing, but it means that they knew.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of unclear. And it could be that she might have said something like that, but exaggerated a little bit, or that she's just lying, or that she said something slightly different from that, like, oh, well, let's talk to the pollsters or something. But anyway, that was really funny.
Yeah.
And then she actually said, I think in an interview with David Remnick of The New Yorker, that she went on Morning Joe, according to her, not intending to say that. And she even said something kind of halfway believable. It said, listen, if I thought I was going to get so much attention, I would have worn a better outfit, which I thought, either that's a very high level, obfuscation or has the ring of truth.
Maybe.
But the other thing is that I've always respected Biden for having a great staff. I mean, there's just been no screw ups. I mean, with the exception of maybe Afghanistan, there's been very little screw ups and leaks and stuff like that, which I admire. Okay. And, but she said something really amazing. She said, I've never been that impressed with his political operation, she admitted. They won the White House. Bravo. But my concern was this isn't happening and we have to make a decision for this to happen, meaning stepping away.
Yeah.
So I've never been that impressed with his political operation. I mean, that is the meanest thing she's ever said about Biden. I mean, that's just very high level.
Well, she's not saying about Biden. She's saying about his team.
Well, no, but it's just a very heavy thing to say, meaning, I don't know, it seems so unnecessary to me. I don't know if she is turning the screws or if maybe, I was also thinking maybe she's just being very relaxed talking to Remnick and just talking, I'm not, like I might say, I don't know if I really like Chaz's, vocal delivery really. I mean, he's a smart, it's almost like that. Like maybe it's a super meticulous insider observation, but it also came across as really mean. Yeah,
look, that's possible. My take on it when I heard that was that she was sucking up to Biden because she's worried that she's ruined the relationship for good. And she wants to be, she doesn't want bad blood. She wants to get back in with him.
So you think that was, I would not have been, I'm impressed with him, but not his political.
Yeah, I think she's blaming, I take that as her blaming his staff for his failures.
Yeah, which brings me to the last thing I wanted to mention, the interview with Anita Dunn in Politico. Did you see that?
I did. She still hasn't forgiven them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she's still angry.
Which completely makes your point because those people were delusional.
Yeah.
They were saying, we could have still won. I was watching the monitors as people were watching. We actually gained votes. And either she's completely lying or the whole system is flawed because it is completely not true that anyone could watch that debate and come away thinking that guy is coming away saying, I was on the fence, but now I'm going to vote for him. With the exception of the one thing she couched it is they didn't like Trump, which I can understand. He's very polarizing. So, and then she also said this really funny thing. She said, what it did change was 24 days of unremittent, negative, horrible attacks on Joe Biden, which again is delusional because it's not that people were attacking. It's that Joe Biden had put himself in such a vulnerable position that people had no desire to go down this route, felt they had to.
Of course they didn't want to go down that route. Yeah.
Okay, so last thing.
Yeah.
This is the funny thing I liked. She said, I had a lot of Republicans, this is very Trumpian, I had a lot of Republican friends who were sending me texts during the period saying, your party's insane. They were saying, we've never seen anything like this. Isn't that like Trump? Our party closes ranks. You fight it through. We have a 24-hour news cycle. He had a bad debate and you move on. All these Republicans were calling me and saying that. I don't think that's true.
I don't think it's true that any of them said that seriously.
Right.
But I can believe that Republicans rang her up and were trying to get Biden to stay.
Yeah, you want to stay in the race. Exactly.
Yeah, of course they want Biden to stay in the race. That was suiting them nicely.
Exactly. So that's another level of delusion in
Totally.
this. So that I thought was a huge insight into some of the things. And I can see that after 4 years and during the Trump attacks and doing all the extraordinary things they did, you could be very proud and thinking you could get through this. And that's what you pay people to do.
Yeah.
But I just think history's going to say that the system actually shakily worked, at least inside the Democratic Party. Yeah,
you build a fort. Of course, that makes sense. They get defensive. That's fine. But yeah, no, I think look, certainly no one's going to say it was a mistake. I mean, you look at the polling. I talked about this a couple of weeks ago. That it's literally nearly 90% approval now of Biden stepping down. Like, no one thinks he should have stayed, apart from Anita Dunn. Yeah. But the only other thing I'd say about what you've just talked about is this is neither here nor there, but something I just want to put on the record. I was actually thinking, I reckon Nancy Pelosi might be not liked, but the most respected politician of the modern era. I'm not saying she's not liked, but she's obviously liked by Democrats. But I'm saying I reckon Republicans almost universally respect her. Yeah. Like I think if you could poll people about who they think is fearsome and imposing and effective, like who they respect for their competence. Yeah. Surely she'd be in the 80s at least. Yeah. Like her age. She'd be in the 80% at least. Like she's just such an incredibly competent person, like for such a long period of time, even now. Like I think the reason it was so flawless, the deposing of Biden was because Nancy Pelosi was all over it. Yeah, I think that's part of it.
She said she also claimed she didn't call anyone, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure. So. She might not have called anyone, but everyone would have called her. Yeah. And what did she say to them when they called her?
She needs to make a decision.
Yeah. Anyway.
So can I just say one last thing about Walz? I thought was interesting.
Oh, we're going to get to Walz.
Okay, go ahead.
We're so keen to Walz.
Okay, cool.
Don't worry about that. Let's now let's get a bit more up to date about how Harris has surprised both you and me and a lot of other people in how well she's been doing. Let's start with the polling to begin with where we're at, and then let's talk about why. Okay. So first of all, there's some polls you want to talk about, or do you want me to start?
Well, just people should know there was the Times Siena College poll that came out, and that's the one that everyone's talking about. Of course, it takes several weeks for things to settle in. Polling is very complicated. You have to decide who you're going to be talking to. It's all very iffy and wishy-washy and stuff like this. But this is a significant poll. Vice President Kamala Harris leads former President Trump in 3 crucial battleground states, period, according to a new survey. She is ahead of Mr. Trump by 4 percentage points in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, 50% to 46% among likely voters in each state. Right. The surveys were conducted August 5 to 9.
And that's a change from the one before. Harris was behind by 1 to 2 points in each state. Yeah. So that's a 5 to 6 point turnaround.
Yeah, and obviously it's still within the margin of error, probably technically.
Maybe
But when you see a swing like that, it's very thing. And of course, what are you going to believe? The polls are your own eyes. I mean, you can just see and sense the enthusiasm for her and the relief. And I, just for the record, I always want to say that I always thought that Biden was going to pull it out eventually, before the debate, on the grounds that he beat him the first time, Trump did the insurrection, that even though the polls were even, a majority of those people, of the undecided, were going to break toward him. And I guess conceivably he could have still lost marginally in some of the swing states, but it just struck me as hard how he couldn't win again given Trump's behavior. So I feel pretty optimistic.
Yeah, John thought Biden was going to lose. Was going to win. I thought he was going to lose. This is before the debate. Obviously, everyone thought he was going to lose after the debate. But John thought he was going to win as well. I'll go a few other things from the New York Times Siena poll before I talk about others. Do you know what Harris's favorability is in those 3 states? 49%. It's damn close to 50. It's been a long time since we had someone with 50% favorability.
Yeah, that's a good point.
In a swing state. Neither Harris nor Biden have had that, obviously, during this cycle. Trump's favorability is up to 46%. That's his highest on record in those 3 swing states. Like, people forget this. Like, he has actually been doing well recently, but just, well, not, no. When I say doing well, I mean in polls. And polls recently, off the back of being shot and the convention.
Sure.
Just that Harris is doing better, which is part of what must be freaking him out. He's never done better than he is now, and he's getting lapped.
Right. But just to clarify again, he has a very low ceiling, right? And he's always like 43, 45, 44,
but now
46.
he's 46.
Right. I mean, but that's the very high of it.
Yeah.
And again, there were always undecided people, and we're just seeing that most of them are breaking for her now. So,
yeah.
Because it's just hard for me. I mean, my logic is it's just hard to imagine people who are on the fence about him, like going, oh, okay, I guess I'll vote for him. It just seems to me that's a harder get for him. But that was my analysis.
But the important bit is, if Harris is at 49% and Trump's at 46%, you can bet there isn't too much overlap where there's people who like both of them. The haters have gone. There are no haters left. Yeah. Remember, we had this enormous number of double haters. There were 20% double haters, but like just after the debate. And now they just seem to have disappeared. What that does mean, though, is that means if Trump doesn't lose his shit, he's in a bit late for that, but if he doesn't lose his shit, he's in a good position to come back because she's not going to be 49% forever. Right? She's still, Kamala Harris is in a honeymoon period. Everything's going right for her at the moment. At some point in time, things are going to not go right. If he can hang at 46%, he's in a position to get some momentum going if he doesn't fall apart. But right now he's falling apart. So he might not stay at 46 for long. Also, quality polling. Honest, this is from New York Times Center. Are they honest? 52 to 44 say yes for Harris. 41 to 58 say yes to Trump. I can't believe 41% think Trump is honest. Intelligent, 65% to 32% say yes for Harris, which is interesting because Trump's been trying to sell that she's stupid. It ain't working. Trump's 56% to 43%. Brings the right kind of change. This is interesting. 50% to 48% on Harris. She's a change candidate.
Yeah.
Even though she's the incumbent, theoretically. Trump's 47% to 52%. So she's got more change than Trump. Has the temperament to be president. 54% to 43% for Harris. 45% to 54% for Trump. Has a clear vision for the country. 53% to 44% for Harris, which I find remarkable since she's given no vision whatsoever so far, which we'll get to. But still, just shows that they like her. Right. And Trump is 60% to 39%. He does have a clear vision. That is true. And there's still room for growth. If you look at some of these other polls, YouGov has Harris 2 points ahead of Trump in voting intent, but 5 points ahead when people are asked, who would you prefer to have as president? So this is something we haven't seen before. Before now, we've had Democrats running ahead of the candidates of Biden. Now we've got Harris running ahead of the Democrats, which is interesting. Yeah. Also interesting for me, NPR Marist they got Harris leading by 3, 51 to 48, head-to-head registered. Amongst independents, she's ahead by 9 points, 53 to 44. Who do you think will win? Which is always an interesting question. 48 apiece. 48. Yeah. Trump was ahead by 20 points of Biden. And who do you think would win? Issues. This is also interesting. Abortion, unsurprisingly, Harris had 56 to 41. Democracy, Harris ahead 53 to 46, which is better than Biden was. Biden was basically 50-50. Immigration is interesting. Would you care to guess how much Trump's ahead on immigration? Trump's obviously ahead in immigration. Would you care to guess how much?
8 points.
6 points. It's a lot closer than I was expecting. Economy, Trump's ahead by 3, 51 to 48. Also less than I was expecting. 27% say honesty and trustworthiness is the most important quality. Harris is leading at 75 to 23. That's not a surprise. 20% say being a strong leader is the most important quality. Trump is ahead in that, 78 to 19. Also not a surprise, although I think that over time, I think Kamala Harris might win a bit more approval on strength because I think at the moment she's trying to play up Happy Harris. I don't think that's the real Harris. And I think every now and then we'll see a bit more steel eye Harris, and then I think people will give her a bit more strength points, but maybe a little less joy points if they're measuring that. Also, Trump. These are two more things. I've actually mentioned these on Planet America. At least I will. I've written it in the script. I'll mention it tomorrow. One, from Trump's point of view, the positive that he can hang on to is from CNBC. 79% of Republicans believe their economic fortunes will improve if Trump takes the White House. That's not a surprise. As for Democrats, if Harris takes the White House, only 48% think they'll be better off if Harris wins, which is interesting. 42% say it'll make no difference. I mean, they might not all care, but independents is what I'm interested in here. 31% think they'll be better off financially if Trump wins. 10% think they'll be better off financially if Harris wins. 54% don't think it matters. But Trump still has a financial advantage. Yeah. And this is the thing which I'm really interested in. RFK. Because remember, we had RFK was just this big pool just a sweeping in disaffected voters. So now you got one side who don't have any disaffected voters left. Well, not many. And what happens? There have been 6 quality polls since the changeover. At least there were a week ago when this article came out. Harris led by an average of 1.5 points in those head-to-head matchups. She led by 3.3 points on average when you counted the third-party candidates. Wow. RFK is becoming a Trump spoiler. In the New York Times Siena, RFK's favorability amongst Democrats is 24 to 60. Amongst Republicans, it was 47 to 31.
Wow, yeah.
So that's really ironic, given that he was basically recruited by Steve Bannon to play dirty pool with the Democrats. And now it's a boomerang. He's come back. Yeah. Now, that might not stay the case because we'll see if Harris is still – there are no disaffected Democrats in 3 months' time. But if the Democrats keep united, then this is a real problem for Trump. Like, he might have to buy RFK off because he might cost Trump 2 or 3 points, which would be a real issue for him. Yeah. I mean, until recently, I always dogmatically said I favoured Trump winning the election. I expected Trump to win the election because of RFK. Because I thought in a 50-50 contest, RFK tips it to the Republicans. But now I think it's the opposite. I think that in a 50-50 contest, I think RFK tips it to the Democrats now. So I'm starting to reevaluate.
And I haven't done analysis of what states he's going to be on the ballot. Is he going to be on the ballot in Georgia and Arizona?
It's so unknown because according to him, he's got the votes everywhere. Yeah. But who knows? Yeah. I mean, do you trust his judgment on that? We'll find out. He's
totally beclowned. It's really, really sad. Yeah. And then another thing that people don't talk about with this context is that when it comes to the voters, who the voters are going to be is just so complicated. And I also have this other whole theory about the election that this is just there's so many moving parts. You have the realignment of these parties. You have demographic shifts in the Midwest and demographic shifts in the South, both of which the swing states in each of those areas. You have an asymmetric candidate, Donald Trump, because he's going to be campaigning in a way that very tactically I might have said this on the phone. He's the kind of guy that if he gets trapped into a corner and there's no way out other than to put a firecracker in his mouth and set it off, he'll do it, because that's just how he operates. But the issue with Trump that's so interesting is that he was so good at getting his base out to vote, right? Obviously, in places like Florida and Ohio, where he had a hotbed of support, he's done really well. He did that in 2016. He did it in 2020. The question is, are there more voters for him? I mean, are there more people that he can get out? Now, another thing is you have a lot of people over 8 years. You have many millions of people who weren't of voting age in 2016, who 8 years later, of course, they are. So they're a complete poll, and I think that's where the Elon Musk sort of Twitter incel screwed up young men aspect of America comes into play.
Well, Harris is doing better with the youth,
right? But overall. But I'm just saying in terms of getting the people out. He's got these new people that he can go out and try to convince to vote. Because the trouble with younger people in America is they tend not to vote. But now the other thing, you've had this completely different change in America where we've had really exceptional voting turnout, percentages of voting turnout, which, extraordinary more numbers of people. And I think we're going to see that. And so then, and to some extent on the left, you have to get those people out to vote. But of course, they're going to be very motivated. So I think that's another aspect of these polls that I'm not suspicious of them, but
of course.
It's hard to figure out, are there, and one of the ways he beat the polls in the past by just being so good at getting his people out.
Yeah.
He's a great motivator. Now, but I love this thing about the asymmetric campaign. And the other interesting thing, again, when I think the history books are written, is that there are people talking to Harris. I mean, she's got like the smartest people in the world working with her. Plouffe has come in, and if she can just keep the lines of authority clear and stuff like this, but there's going to be people.
Can you just say who David Plouffe is for the?
Oh yeah, he's one of the architects of Obama's victory.
Yes,
which is a key person.
You're supposed to be the smartest guy in the Obama campaign. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so she is bringing some smart people in, and I think it's going to be interesting to watch her campaign. Are they going to be a little bit asymmetric? You have George Conway. Have you talked about his new pact, the Psycho Pact?
No, I haven't talked about that.
He's being very funny. It's very asymmetrical, making fun of him, taking out ads, and only running them in the local Fox station around Mar-a-Lago. Yeah. And then he ran this new ad, and Trump immediately started posting about it. Yeah. And so you're going to have a lot of people thinking, how can we provoke? They're not going to be running a traditional Democratic campaign is what I'm getting at, which will be really fun to watch as well. Well,
let's go on more with the campaign then. Because the next question is, how has Harris managed to remake herself so effectively? Like, what have they done so that's made such a difference, that surprised people so much?
And so do you want to, what's your theory on it?
Oh, I can go on like it's forever. Yeah, I'll start and then you can jump in.
Yeah.
The first thing is, I think that there was a huge amount of relief and goodwill when she took over, which gave them a leverage point. If you look from June 1st to July 20th, Harris averaged fewer than 74,000 mentions on X per day. From the 21st of July to the 31st of July, that's when she took over, she averaged 1.7 million per day. Is that because she was in the news? Not only because between the debate and his withdrawal, when Biden was everything, he averaged 1.2 million a day. So she was doing 500,000 a day more than him when he was the entire news cycle. And it was because of the memes and the general interest and the activity and just the interest in general of Kamala Harris. And I think she's capitalized on that relief. She's basically followed through on that relief to make her campaign about good vibes, which I think is an astute move, because Trump's whole energy has been a negative energy forever. That's been his power. He makes people scared. He makes people angry. He makes people self-defeating. It's kind of a jiu-jitsu thing where his enemies hurt themselves by overreaching and going too far and just doing stupid shit. And she's just, for the first time, someone has taken the opposite tactic of just going as positive as possible. And this is where we'll get to Walz, but this is where Walz is an astute choice as well. That he is very positive, very energetic. And I think that her campaign is doing lots of controlled laughing, lots of smiling, all the things that Trump can't do and doesn't do. And they're even reclaiming patriotism, which is astonishing. Like, this was part of her speech to the UAW. I've got an example here. This is not like a big high energy moment, but just showing you how she's been trying to reclaim patriotism.
Well, one of the things I love about our country, we are a nation of people who believe in those ideals that were foundational to what made us so special as a nation. We believe in those ideals. And the sisters and brothers of labor have always fought for those ideals. Always fought for those ideals. And we know we are a work in progress. We haven't yet quite reached all of those ideals, but we will die trying, because we love our country and we believe in who we are. And that's what our campaign is about. We love our country. We believe in our country.
See, now that's a classic Kamala Harris says absolutely nothing for a minute thing, right? She said absolutely nothing, but the language, it was just love our country, love our people, love this, love that. Like, it's just, that's her rhetoric. Her rhetoric is trying to reclaim loving your country. Yeah. And I think it's very effective. And you know, Walz does USA chants at her rallies. He leads USA, USA, USA. Like, they are fully trying to embrace that. And I think that's my first of many points I think is very effective. Yeah,
okay, so I really agree, but there's one, there's so many hypocrisies on the right. Okay. And of course there's problems on the left as well. But this thing, because like that's one thing they said about Reagan. He was the happy warrior. He was positive and all that stuff. Hillary Clinton was a very positive person. She was a joyful person. She ran an incredibly positive campaign. She was sunny. She was optimistic. She stood up for America. She had impeccable foreign policy credentials. She had all those things that the right always said about Ronald Reagan, right? And she lost, obviously. And obviously it was her fault because she should have won against the most incompetent, presidential candidate in American history or in the last 100 years. And but I hear that sometimes and say, and I thought that Hillary did that too. I saw Hillary Clinton in Arizona 3 days before the election. It turned out she shouldn't have been in Arizona 3 days before the election. But still, it was like a Kamala Harris rally. It was just incredibly huge. People were happy. She gave a great speech. So I agree with you. And that's what Reagan did. Excuse me. That's what Obama did. That's what Michelle Obama always said. Those lines that she just said, I think almost sounded like were taken from a Michelle Obama speech. And so yes, but I agree with you. That's what they need to do, and maybe they have better characters to do it with this time.
I can keep on going, but do you want to jump in? Or?
Well, I was going to say that first of all, she's just done an extraordinary job. I mean, this has just been a really amazing thing, and it could be wrong, but it seems to me the first thing they had to do is turn around her image. And they obviously lucked into this amazing situation, and they've been riding it, one of those Olympic surfers.
Totally.
Okay, so it's been really thrilling to watch. And I'm assuming what they're doing is they're obviously behind the scenes preparing her for press conferences. They're preparing for the convention. I mean, people forget that an American political convention takes 9 months to put together, and they had to put a whole brand new one together in the space of 3.5 weeks or something like this. So. We'll talk about the press conferences later, I think, but I think what she would say is we're doing some things behind the scenes, and she's got to be ready to talk about all these things. And I'm assuming what they're going to do is, in the words of during the Clinton campaign, it's the economy stupid. Right now, it's immigration stupid and the economy stupid. And I assume that since those are her two biggest weaknesses, they're just going to go all out and try to inoculate her a little bit about those, because those are the two things. So they fixed the personality issue, okay, and now they've got to attack those two things.
Her ad campaign is very much focused on immigration at the moment. I'll play a couple of them in a second. Yeah. Another thing that she's done is she's made Trump the incumbent in a change election. I did refer to this before.
Yeah.
CNBC, Harris leads Trump 39-38 when voters asked who is better to bring positive change to the country. I said that before. Trump is obviously old, represents the past. Harris, this is the advantage of Harris being non-existent in the administration. She's not associated with the administration as much as she could be.
Except for immigration, yeah.
Yeah, immigration is the big sore point. And she's not really running that hard on Biden's achievements either. Like, she could be doing that, but she's not, which I think is smart. It's because she wants it to be about change. Also, the fact that she's been a bit invisible means that the views on her are still relatively flexible, and she's taken advantage of that. So for the Blueprint is a Democratic focus group company. For Trump, 71% of registered voters say there's absolutely nothing that could change their opinions of him. For Harris, it's 57%. So that gives them more to play with. In terms of taking the opposite, 12% say they're open to changing their mind about Trump. 20% say they're open to changing their minds about Harris. So she has twice as many voters to play with. And this is how she does it. She has the opportunity to define herself now. They spent $28.6 million on Facebook, Instagram, Google, YouTube ads in the first week. That's a record. And then it was flip-flop time. They went back to 2019. And this is good. They can use the fact that people haven't made up their mind about her yet to just reverse every single thing they want to get rid of, right? Back in 2019, she ran as hard to the left as she possibly could. She had a whole bunch of policies that were never going to stand up in the general election, which she didn't worry about at the time. And now she has to worry about them. And so, I mean, like, you can see what was coming. Dave McCormick, a Republican Senate candidate, released the motherload of Harris 2019 primary positions as an ad, which is, I'll just play it because it's even though it's from Pennsylvania, it's just a great summary of all the stuff that Trump wants to talk about over the next 3 months.
The nonpartisan GovTrack has rated you as the most liberal senator.
I am prepared to get rid of the filibuster to pass a Green New Deal. There's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking.
Would you ban offshore drilling?
Yes.
What is the solution for voters in the fossil fuel industry?
Giving the workers an ability to transition.
We're not going to treat people who are undocumented and cross the border as criminals. That's correct.
Raise your hand if you think it should be a civil offense rather than a crime to cross the border without documentation.
Abolish ICE. Yeah, is that a position you agree with?
And we need to probably think about starting from scratch.
Outdated, it is wrong-headed thinking to think that the only way you're going to get communities to be safe is to put more police officers on the street.
Would you support changing the dietary guidelines?
Yes.
The food pyramid. What people
Yes. Yes.
To reduce red meat specifically.
Yes.
People who are convicted in prison, like the Boston Marathon bombers, on death row, people who are convicted of sexual assault, they should be able to vote?
I think we should have that conversation.
We have to have a buyback program, and I support a mandatory buyback program.
So for people out there who like their insurance, well, they don't get to keep it.
Let's eliminate all of that. Let's move on. I am opposed to any policy that would deny any human being public health, period.
Okay, so that last one, for those who are listening and not seeing, was about giving healthcare, free healthcare to illegal immigrants. Now, see, that ad was put out like 2 days after she took over. And within another 2 or 3 days, the New York Times ran an article saying the Harris campaign announced that the vice president no longer wanted to ban fracking. In addition, campaign officials said she now backed the Biden administration's budget request for increasing funding for border enforcement, no longer supported a single-payer health insurance program, echoed Mr. Biden's call for banning assault weapons, but not a requirement to sell them to the federal government. So in one paragraph, she changed her mind on banning fracking, abolish ICE, Medicare for all, gun buybacks. 4 major flip-flops in one paragraph in one day. Right? And then she changed her mind on decriminalising border crossings. The next day, she pledged no tax increases for those who earn less than $400,000, which means she can't pay for most of what she used to run on. And then she started campaigning as a tough prosecutor, which obviously she wasn't doing in 2019 as well. So it's a complete flip-flop on basically everything she stood for in 2019, and it's working. It's working because in the New York Times Siena poll, they asked, is Harris too left? 44% said yes. 44% said she was just right, and 6% said she was too right-wing. How long has it been since they had... I mean, people were saying Biden was too left. Harris is way lefter of Biden. but she's successfully flopped her way to using people's flexible views to redefine herself in a way that Trump would be sweating about.
Yeah, I think it's such an interest. It's like you said, this is going to be the most unusual presidential campaign of my lifetime, right? I mean, can you think of anything that's been this bizarre to have a former president running, a criminal running, someone who never went through the primary process, becoming the candidate? You had this. I think again. I think you mentioned this earlier that you had all these people who were unhappy with Biden. Now they have somewhere to go. They're happy about it, and there is this element in America that's just blissful. Like, okay, great, I got something I want. Blah 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 blah. When they start talking about fracking and stuff like that. Yeah. Now the trouble is that there's a lot of fracking in Pennsylvania. A lot of people who work in that sort of Pennsylvania's a big oil state, right? So while we are not noticing, every person, because you can go to Facebook and say, hey, I want this ad to be seen by every person in southern Pennsylvania who has anything to do with the oil industry, right? And there's a lot of people who are of older age who who might otherwise be a Democratic voter who might be susceptible to that. So we don't know if they keep pursuing this. And the other thing you have to remember is that most Americans aren't paying attention to the election yet. They're watching the Olympics. They're not going, oh yeah, I remember how there isn't 7 in 100 Americans who are capable of saying, oh yeah, I remember Kamala Harris was really anti-fracking, but I really believe her now when she says she's not anymore.
But that's my point. This is the time to flip-flop because the issues they're going to be arguing about are going to be in 2 months' time.
Right.
And this is all ancient history by then.
Right. But again, we have to remember that there could be things that we don't see that just every single person in Southern Pennsylvania getting this thing on their Facebook feed every day, which you can't.
Yeah.
That's something they'll notice, right?
Yeah, sure.
So that's going to be a really interesting lever as we move on.
And along the same lines, we mentioned about the border was the biggest issue, for her at least. Blueprint found that they took to a focus group various attacks that have been used against her, and they found by a mile the most effective was, I'll read you the quote, Vice President Harris has been an absolute disaster on immigration. As Biden's so-called border czar, she's turned our southern border into a sieve, allowing countless illegal immigrants, criminals and drug traffickers to flood into our country. Her incompetence and open border policies have jeopardized American security and overwhelmed our southern border. That scored 67, which is a high score on their level, right? Like on their scale. The next highest was at 61. It was, our economy is weak and inflation is soaring because Joe Biden and VP Harris let government spending get out of control and let companies rip us off on everything from gas to groceries. Whether it's a house or a hamburger, it's impossible to afford anything after just 3 years of Harris and Biden. Imagine what the economy will look like if Vice President Harris gets another 4 years. So that was 61. So immigration was above that. Then at 57, it was San Francisco liberal. I won't read the whole thing. At 46, it was she took over from a coup. At 28, it was she's a DEI hire. So it was way down, which is why it was so dumb they started off with that attack. And at 17 was she slept her way to the top. So the two attacks they began with were the two dumb attacks, and the one that I haven't talked much about inflation so far, but inflation and immigration are the ones that Blueprint at least are saying they're the ones that Harris needs to worry about, right? Trump did start running some ads about immigration. I've got one of them here.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
This is America's border czar, and she's failed us. Under Harris, over 10 million illegally here. 250,000 Americans dead from fentanyl. Brutal migrant crimes. And ISIS now here.
Do you have any plans to visit the border? You haven't been to the border.
And I haven't been to Europe. I mean, I don't understand the point that you're making.
Kamala Harris, failed, weak, dangerously liberal.
ISIS. Yeah, I'm not sure ISIS are a huge problem. But that Europe grab that's a terrible grab. She's gonna regret that one. But I was just gonna say just quickly, Blueprint also suggested two responses for the immigration attack. One was, she's the child of immigrants and knows we need a better system with responsible, humane policies. The other was, she's a prosecutor who's taken on gangs and drug smugglers, and she supports bipartisan legislation to give Border Patrol the money they need. I'm now going to play you her latest ad.
Kamala Harris has spent decades fighting violent crime. As a border state prosecutor, she took on drug cartels and jailed gang members for smuggling weapons and drugs across the border. As vice president, she backed the toughest border control bill in decades. And as president, she will hire thousands more border agents and crack down on fentanyl and human trafficking. Fixing the border is tough. So is Kamala Harris.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
So that was exactly what the polling told them to do. Exactly. And throw in trying to build up her strength numbers as well at the end there.
Yeah.
So they know what they're doing.
Yeah, and she should totally run on stuff like this and crime. And I I'm always reluctant to say, oh, they should be doing this because we're all armchair political consultants.
I'm just trying blueprint here, not me.
Right. No. And so everyone has an opinion about these things, and they have very smart people. And of course, they have data that we don't, the stuff that you have, times 10, times 100.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I always think the Democrats are bad at setting the terms of the debate. And I just don't understand why people like Biden and her from the very first day and off, and once in a while they say stuff like this, but they don't make it the center of their message, which is that Republicans don't want to fix the border. They want to run on the border. 10 or 12 years ago, you had Marco Rubio and the so-called Gang of Eight who were going to solve the immigration thing. We came to an agreement. The Republicans turned tail and ran. 10 years later, we had a deal to fix the border with the Republicans. Donald Trump told them not to do it. They turned tail and ran. These are people who aren't serious. And the reason, I think, even though I'm being an armchair political consultant here and I don't have the data they do, but that's something that appeals to independents. Because a lot of independents are fairly smart. They're they just want to be talked to sensibly. And I think that's something they can understand. They go, you know what, you're right. That did happen. And the Republicans ran. You're right. They are playing games. And I thought that's the wedge that, again, things like about the deficit and the mishandling of the economy under the COVID thing, or the mishandling of COVID, which led to a lot of the economic problems, they just don't. They're a little more genteel than the Republicans. And the Republicans always say, oh, you're playing the blame game. You're blaming the last guy. They always do that. And of course, that's all Trump ever does. He blames the last guy. He plays the so-called blame game. And I just think that it's that working the ref thing. They become so cowed by those Republican attacks. They don't actually stand up and change the terms of the debate, which the Republicans, for better or worse, are quite good at. One of the best examples of that is the Black Lives Matter. Because obviously you have a problem with it's not as much as the left says, but there is a problem with police killing, relatively defenseless black men. And so people say, look, Black Lives Matter. And then the Republicans turn around, wait a minute, what are you saying? Only Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. And they go, wait, that's not what you're saying. You were the ones who said all lives didn't matter. We're calling attention to the ones you're not paying attention to, but they lose that debate. And so the Republicans are more fearless about going after the person's perceived strength, which is where swift voting comes from. And of course, the attacks we'll talk later on about Walz.
We will. One more thing I want to say about Harris before we get on to Trump, because Trump's had a pretty active little while. I'll give her credit for this. If you knew me 6 years ago, back about 2017, I was going around saying I thought she was going to be the next president. And the reason why I thought she matched up on Trump quite well for a number of reasons. And I was expecting a lot of
things from her.
Yeah, I was expecting a lot of ways. And so that's why I was so surprised when she actually debuted. And I thought, wow, this was not what I was expecting. But what she does appear to do is learn. She appears to learn. And I've got a great example for you, which I think we've all seen over the last few days without necessarily processing that what we're seeing is learning taking place, and that is how she deals with protesters. In Detroit, she spoke briefly with the protest leaders beforehand, right? The pro-Palestinian protesters before the rally. She told them she was open to have a formal meeting with them, and then they protested anyway. And this is what she did.
He intends to surrender our fight against the climate crisis, and he intends to end the Affordable Care Act. You know what? If you want Donald Trump to win, then say that, otherwise I'm speaking.
Now, I played that for an extra 15 seconds. For those who are listening, you're hearing cheering going, why is he still playing this? Because those who are watching were looking at the look on her face. That is the key. It doesn't sound great what she said. The way she looks is much worse. She was giving them the stink eye, the filthiest, most entitled, huffy stink eye she could possibly muster. That is a bit of what I'm expecting we might be seeing a bit more of over the next few months. And if she's particularly competent, she'll be able to keep that hidden, because I think that's a bit of the Kamala Harris that she wants to hide from the public. When she gets pissed off, she gets really filthy. And that was an example right there. But 4 days later, same thing happens. The protesters come again. And this is how she reacted this time.
Which includes respecting the voices that I think that we are hearing from. And let me just say this on topic of what I think I'm hearing over there. Let me just speak to that for a moment, and then I'm going to get back to the business at hand. So let me say, I have been clear. Now is the time to get a ceasefire deal and get the hostage deal done. Now is the time. And the president and I are working around the clock every day to get that ceasefire deal done and bring the hostages home. So I respect your voices, but we are here to now talk about this race in 2024.
This time she was ready. She had a line written. Her perfect line where she threw a bone to the right, talking about the hostages. She threw a bone to the left, talking about ceasefire. She actually didn't concede anything. Like, she's saying, we want a ceasefire, which she's been saying for 6 months. We want the hostages to come home, which she's been saying the whole time. She actually gave them nothing, but she sounded like she was making concessions, and she sounded like she was actually interacting with them, when actually she was just telling them to shut up, just like she did the first time, but she did it competently this time because she was ready and she learnt. And learning on the job, I think, is something that not everyone does. And if I was Trump, I would be worried about that when it comes to the debate. Yeah. She can memorize lines. He cannot. and so if they go through every topic that's going to be coming, I don't think she's very quick on her feet at all. But I think she can memorize a whole bunch of things, and she can deliver them competently. And that's all you need to do. Yeah. And the fact she can learn from her mistakes, I think, is also, that's part of why she's doing well, I think.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned this before. The other thing is that the Democrats at this point, they've seen this. This isn't their first rodeo with Trump, and I think they're really going to be thinking a couple steps ahead of him when it does come to debates and all this stuff. They're really the sense I just get. It's just odd. I just feel like this is one of the most professional juggernauts of a campaign since like Reagan in '84. Where it just felt like there wasn't even an election. It was just Morning in America steamrolling.
Wow, we'll say.
No, I'm saying, of course, we're going to see that. I'm just saying, and this is different because then he was in control. He was running the aircraft carrier. He had very smart people around him. And this time, you do have that Democratic ragtag bunch and stuff like this, but there is no, the entire Democratic Party is there, and everyone is. You just don't have that thing like, oh, this is our little team. We're going to do things the way we want. It's like the brain trust they have for this, including a lot of really famous rich people who are helping them out. I saw, if we can go on a tangent for just a second, there was a really great story about the Olympics, about the second gentleman in the Olympics. Did you see that?
I've got Tangent Treehouse sting, but I didn't bring it with me.
Oh,
what a shame. Go.
And the second gentleman was at the Olympics, okay? And there was a little playbook thing about him. Oh, so this is from the Washington Post. At the Paris Olympics, the second gentleman moves toward first place. Kamala Harris was still veeped in, cuffed by circumstance, towing the line of loyalty. But Emhoff, this is Doug Emhoff, her husband, is suddenly being treated like number 2 on the call sheet in the jargon of an entertainment lawyer, which he used to be, instead of number 4. I cannot tell you, Emhoff said, not even 24 hours into his Paris trip, how many leaders here have already whispered to me, thank you, you need to win. And the thing is, I actually believe that. I really honestly do. And I just mean there's a lot of people in the Democratic Brain Trust right now who are working toward this.
Sure.
Can I mention two last things about the election?
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I really care about is just like the things that are going to matter that, again, in this day-to-day thing don't get talked about. And one, as I said before, I think we have to remember this is going to be a very asymmetric campaign. It's just there's going to be crazy things happening on a given day, and there's going to be a lot of game theory, and there's people saying, okay, when he does this, what are we going to do? When he does this, what are we going to do? There's going to be a lot of rapid response. And I think it's actually going to be more than rapid response. It's going to be they have 10 responses ready for everything. And it's like, okay, let's go with 3. I honestly think that there's just really smart people there because they've seen the way Trump does it, because Trump always will say something outrageous, you question him on it, and he says something 10 times as outrageous, and they're going to be ready for that. Yeah,
he is predictable in his unpredictability.
Exactly, and I think they're going to be smart about it for once. Now, I will also say that that the Democrats are just terrible at messaging, and let me give you 2 examples. One, just right now, she was at her best, and did you hear her talk about the American Affordable Care Act? She said they want to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, okay? People don't know what the hell the Affordable Care Act is. They really don't. They talk about an Obamacare or whatever, and I just bet you if you went to Arizona or Georgia, I used to live in Arizona, if you went up to 19 people and said, what the hell is the Affordable Care Act, 2 of them would know.
Yeah.
Okay? Obamacare, they would pretty much know. But everyone knows if they get reelected, they're going to allow insurance companies to stop insuring you for a pre-existing condition. Better, they're going to allow insurance companies to get rid of your insurance if you get cancer.
Yeah.
That's all she's got to say. They just don't have that personal, like they lapse into the jargon. And again, those would have been incredibly great things because everyone can relate to that. Everyone in America is afraid, if I get cancer and I don't have insurance, I'm going to lose my house. I'm going to go bankrupt. Okay?
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Another example, Pete Buttigieg. He's one of the best communicators anywhere.
Yeah.
Okay? Remember when the first thing started where he said, where J.D. Vance said, oh, there's all these childless people running the Democratic Party, okay, like Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg, which was just, of course, nonsense. But, of course, Pete Buttigieg responded, and he has a great thing to tell. He was he went to Afghanistan, and he's a guy who's married to another guy, and I guess they adopted kids, and he had that. But when he talked about it, he said, and I know that when Connor and I went on our adoption journey, we blah, blah, blah. It's just like, who outside of like Gwyneth Paltrow talks about their adoption journey? It's just so wrong. And they've got to get rid of it. They said, we knew these 2 little kids, all we want, they didn't have parents. We knew that we could give them the life they deserved. And by the way, do you know that in certain states, they still won't allow couples like me to adopt? There's all these great things you can say. There's all these kids that aren't getting adopted because of prejudice against gay people. There's all these great personal things. And said, my personal adoption journey, I just want to slap him. And the Democrats really keep an eye on that because that could be the difference in winning.
I'll definitely take your point on the adoption journey, but I reckon we can spot Pete Buttigieg 1 or 2 mistakes given just how high a standard his communications
he's brilliant.
are generally. But I take
even
your
he,
point.
that's my point. Yeah.
Can
I mention one other thing we should watch out for?
Yeah.
Rupert Murdoch. I want to get this on the record because it might happen.
Yeah,
okay?
Please.
That Rupert Murdoch is very old. He could pass away at any time. Okay, number 1. That will throw the entire right-wing media sphere into chaos.
Yes.
I assume that Lachlan will take over immediately, running Fox News, which is the force multiplier.
Yeah.
Though, of course, it is much more fractured now, we have to remember. Chaos could result. It could be that he's not a strong enough person to stand up to Laura Ingraham and Sean Hannity and stuff like that. Fox could go further off the rails. One thing that could happen, Rupert Murdoch is fine. Rupert Murdoch keeps control, and Rupert Murdoch does what he's done, believe it or not, many times before, which is take a look at the 2 candidates and go, one of them's a loser and one of them isn't. And in this scenario, looks at Trump and says, this guy's the loser this time. Okay? And that could really happen. That, if things keep going badly for him, J.D. Vance is a terrible vice presidential candidate. Trump is getting a little wackier than he used to be. And you could see, I don't think it's a zero possibility that the election could go on and Trump could display some weaknesses and Fox kind of goes, you know what, we're going to turn down the heat a little bit on this, and which will cause a lot of consternation inside Fox And of course, you have a much more powerful right-wing media sphere that isn't quite as allied with Fox, that's going to stick with Trump. However, that could be a very important development.
That's a really interesting
and he's done
thought.
it before.
Yeah, he has.
He's screwed over right-wing politicians on both sides.
That's a really interesting thought, especially given he didn't like Trump much to begin with.
He doesn't like Trump at all.
Yeah. So I will say this, though. I mean, this is a complete tangent now. I won't dwell on it, but I wouldn't be surprised if Rupert Murdoch doesn't have as much control over Fox as he used to. And I'll tell you why I say that. Because Fox has changed in the last few months, a few years. I don't know if you've watched much Fox recently, but then if you have, then you'd know that their two stars are Jesse Waters and Greg Gutfeld. That's a very different Fox to what it used to be. It's not a very Rupert Murdoch kind of Fox. Those guys don't do news. They don't even do anything that approximates news. They do mockery, and they do frat boy shit. That's what they do. Like, Fox has stopped being the Tucker Carlson, Bill O'Reilly kind of Fox, whereas someone beating the table, putting forth their views, trying to set the agenda in some way. They're not doing that. What they're doing is they're just throwing popcorn at the screen. That's what they're doing.
Yeah.
Like, they're just smart asses. They're just professional smart asses. And I don't think that's Rupert Murdoch at all, which makes me think that his hands are off the wheel. I don't know whose hands are on the wheel, but I just don't think it's Rupert Murdoch anymore. I don't think he would put up with that. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but like whatever you think about Rupert Murdoch, he's always been a news kind of guy. He's always been trying to set the news agenda, and Fox has given up on the news agenda completely.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. I mean, I guess, the evening has always been insane. There used to be, I forget his name now, the crazy guy with the blackboard with all
Glenn Beck.
Yeah, Glenn Beck. I mean, there's been incredibly bizarre swings in how
but
they
he
do
was
it.
still trying to set the agenda in his own weird way. Like that, like Greg Gutfeld is not trying to set any agenda at all. He's trying to make jokes about fat women. That's what he's trying to do. Yeah. Like, he tries to, like, if he doesn't make a joke about the ladies from The View being ugly at least once per episode, he feels like he's failed.
Yeah.
That's what he's there to do. Like,
yeah, maybe you're right. I mean, because he is getting very, very old and stuff like this. But I've just been reading a lot of Rupert Murdoch books, and that would really represent a change in him, because he is very controlling. He's very aware. On the other hand, now it could be that. No, but the thing is, I'm sorry, here's the pattern. What happens is that leave it alone, they get good ratings. Leave it alone, they get good ratings. Leave it alone. And at a certain point, he goes, no. And he wheels it back in.
Yeah, maybe.
That's, I guess, what I'm getting at. Yeah. A, but B, with the added thing here that he might kind of think, look, what's the downside at this point? There could be some serious Trump dangers of him getting reelected. Or he might just anticipate that he's going to lose, in which case he's going to try to cut some sort of friendly deal with Kamala Harris or something. So anyway, that just might happen.
Yeah.
That was the last thing I wanted to say. Oh, yeah, that was the last thing I wanted to say.
Okay.
About that.
Well, let's just talk about now we're getting to the really topical stuff about, like, the other advantage I think Harris has is by comparison to Trump, who is just spinning out at the moment. The last 2 weeks, he's been really not dealing with Harris's rise well at all. I think it's because of the rallies. I think that's part of his identity, that he is the one who gets the big crowds that's what makes, he has been obsessed with his crowds the entire time. That has been his message to himself that he is loved. And now he's watching someone beating him at it. Someone who until now he had zero respect for. And I think that's I personally, that's my attempt to psychoanalyze him. That's the reason I think he is falling apart. But whatever the reason, he is falling apart. Like, he is spinning out. There have been just some insane truths recently. Like, for instance, he's becoming obsessed with Biden coming back, which is just, have you seen these? Yes. It's just, I've got one of them here. What are the chances that crooked Joe Biden, the worst president in the history of the US, whose presidency was unconstitutionally stolen from him by Kamala, Barack Hussein Obama, crazy Nancy Pelosi, shifty Adam Schiff, crying Chuck Schumer, and others on the lunatic left, crashes the Democratic National Convention and tries to take back the nomination, beginning with challenging me to another debate. He feels that he made a historically tragic mistake by handing over the US presidency, a coup, to the people in the world he most hates, and he wants it back now. Like, you might think, oh, he's just joking. But he's been doing this gear at his rallies as well, and he seems dead serious when he's doing it, and the crowd aren't laughing. The crowd are just waiting for him to shut up. And like, it's weird how obsessed he's become with this. It takes an amazingly creative mind to come up with something so inane. But
it's really true. It's just, even by his standards, it's crazy. Yeah. And the other thing, it's all part of this thing where he just keeps talking about Biden. Yeah. He does these interviews or these press conferences or speeches, and he just keeps talking about Joe Biden as if he's still the opposition. And again, I'm totally with you. It just seems like, the MAGA crowd is very, very, I don't want to say forgiving, but something like that. But at a certain point, there is that problem where they're sitting there just thinking, that's not quite right.
I actually think part of it as well might be, look, and this is just speculation, complete speculation, but it's possible he can't do rallies anymore. Like, I think the dog that hasn't barked much so far this election, that people haven't noticed, is that he hasn't done many rallies at all.
He's hardly campaigning, yeah.
But not just that. How many rallies do you think he's done this year, this calendar year, in August? Take a guess. How many?
I don't know.
Take a guess.
This calendar year up through August?
Yeah.
I don't know, 8?
That's exactly right. Well done.
Yeah, so 1 a month.
1 a month.
Yeah, and he's running for president.
Like from July the 1st to August the 10th, 2016, he did 22 rallies in 6 weeks. He's done 8 this year. Now, when Biden was falling apart, he laid low, and a lot of people, including me, said, "Good move, keep the focus on Biden."
Yeah,
he's now laying low again.
Yeah,
maybe he needs to lay low. Like, I mean, the guy's just been shot at. Let's not forget that. It's like maybe he's freaking out a bit. I don't know, but it just seems to me like he's doing suspiciously low number of rallies. And it makes me think that maybe he knows he's struggling physically. Yeah. And that's part of what is spooking him out. He's got no accelerator to push anymore. I guess we'll find out.
Okay, now I kind of agree with that. But on the other hand, you'd also think that then maybe he'd only speak for half an hour. I mean, he just seems obsessed with just rambling for 90 minutes. And maybe that's a
psychological need. When he's out there, he's just got to keep on going. I mean, like, do you think it was in his interest to do that at his convention speech? When he starts, he just keeps going.
Speech.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So anyway, there's the rallies, there's the nicknames. He's just struggling so hard with the nicknames. There's been Laughing Kamala, Lying Kamala, Crazy Kamala, Dumb as a Rock Kamala, now Kamabla. There's a very funny exchange with S.V. Date, the senior the senior political correspondent for Huffington Post. Date texted a senior Trump campaign official, "Why is he misspelling her name Kamabla?" The response, Kamabla. "What does that mean?" The response, Kamabla. "Can I use that on the record?" The response, Kamabla. They got nothing. I mean, I know that they're having fun there as well, but just it's so obvious that
it's just contemptuous. And I think this is a huge mistake. Yeah. And again, like we were talking about with the breakdancing, I mean, America it obviously has racist issues in all sorts of ways, but most the racial issues on the right, even though it's stupid and wrong, is, there's too much concern about blacks now, that things are basically equal, and I'm sick of hearing about affirmative action, blah, blah, blah. That is wrong, but it's a coherent political position in a certain way. And then of course there's out and out racists and, the thugs and blah, 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 blah. But there are a lot of people, and a lot of them are black and a lot of them are women, who do not like the idea of making fun of a black woman's name. I mean, that is really bad.
That's a good call.
And, the black African-American female constituents in America is very key to the Democratic coalition. And I feel like every time they hear that, that's just, don't get me, you know what I mean? Oh, and I want to say the other thing. The great thing about Kamala Harris's voice, I don't like calling her Kamala, is there are church cadences in it. And it is beautiful the way she talks. You know, if you close your eyes and just listen to her, she's got that keening, emotional, kind of yearning feel to it that comes right out of the African-American church tradition. That's going to be appealing to a lot of people, white and black. And this thing of going to someone like that and just not even having the respect of her name it's even worse than everything they said about Barack Obama. And particularly after Barack Obama, you know, this idea you're still doing that I think is very, very polarizing.
On Planet America, we spoke to Josh Doss, who does private polling in the black community, and he said he was very clear, both on and off air, that the whole she decided to become black a few years ago thing went down incredibly badly in the black community.
Oh yeah,
I mean, that's
just
not
everyone. It's just beyond the pale. It's just it isn't a political attack. It's not saying, look we really need to talk about the way things are now or anything. It's just cruel, mean-spirited. It harks back to the crudest kind of racism. So I think they should just keep on doing it because, boy, that is just, of all the things he's done, that's just the worst.
Anyway, I want you to talk about, we're talking about Trump spiraling. The most obvious example was in his press conference this week, which I could spend some time on, but I don't want to because I'm looking at the time. And the highlight I know you want to talk about is the helicopter story. So before I throw to you on that, I just want to say one more thing just to finish this little section off, which is, this is one for the Australian viewers. You're not going to know what I'm talking about. but the whole, what I've been setting up here, the idea of the happy, vibey campaign, you push not many policies, but you push them hard, like a couple of catchphrase kind of policies. You don't go into too much detail. You just contrast yourself with the dark cloud over the other side. And you just keep on drawing a contrast between the dark cloud and happy people over here. Is a real Kevin 07 vibe for me about this. Kevin 07 was Kevin Rudd's campaign.
Oh, right.
Back in 2007, where the dark cloud was the end of the Howard government, which was kind of falling apart. And all he did was smile a lot and have nice, happy T-shirts and repeat the same three policies. We're going to sign the Kyoto Protocol, like stuff like that, which just meant nothing really. And he just romped it in. And there's a bit of, they're trying to do the same thing. In Australia, you can do that because election campaigns go for 4 weeks. You can smile for 4 weeks without any trouble whatsoever. She's trying to do it for 4 months. So whether she can actually pull that off, this is a new campaign for America. They don't do that in America. That's the Australian style campaign. But if she can pull it off for 4 months, then maybe that will be importing a new style of campaign to America for the future that they'll replicate in the future. But well, it's an interesting experiment. But having said that, let's get back to the dark cloud. Tell me about the helicopter story.
Oh, well, this whole press conference was hilariously deranged. Again, we've said this. I haven't done this yet, but I wanted to go back into a history of people saying, even by Trump standards, this was a new low.
Yeah.
And it really was a new low, even by Trump standards. It was rambling. It was crazy. He kept saying the same things over and over. If people are interested, they can look up a really nice thing NPR did online. And the headline is, 162 lies and distortions in a news conference. NPR fact checks former President Trump. And it literally has 162 lies and distortions all listed, which is pretty interesting. Hey, and one thing, actually, this just reminded me, what you just said about Kamala Harris. What's so interesting is that what do we have? We have, is it 11 weeks now we have till the election? Something like that?
Something like that, yeah.
So there's going to be this week, which is a wash. Next week is the Democratic convention. And then she gets a week of kind of, in theory, continuing high from the Democratic convention. So
that's going to come down to the debate. The debate's, right, 2 weeks after that, yeah.
So it is kind of very interesting. That's another as George Bush would say, another strategery planning on the point of her campaign is how they can, because for Kamala Harris, as this momentum continues, which she has for probably at least 2 weeks, after that, if they can keep riding that, all they have to do is just click off a day, just where they don't lose anything, which, of course, as you say, is going to happen, right? But that'll be interesting. So anyway, so the best thing about this news conference, okay, because Trump always manages to top himself, he said basically that, hey, he was in a helicopter once with Willie Brown. And I should say about Kamala Harris, I dislike California Democrats for just all these reasons. I mean, most, with the exception of Nancy Pelosi, right? Dan Feinstein was a terrible mayor of San Francisco. Willie Brown was a terrible mayor. They did all these kind of structural things that screwed up the city. And so, you know, and then there were the Burton brothers that gerrymandered the whole state and just polarized the state for decades to come and stuff like that. So that said, you know, she was a product of all that. And 100 years ago, I actually did a history of black politics in the San Francisco Bay Area about the origins of it, the brotherhood of railroad car porters and the origins and blah, 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 blah. So I know a little bit about this. And Willie Brown is a very famous California politician. He was Speaker of the California House and later became mayor of San Francisco. He's a raconteur. He's very squirrely. He's incredibly corrupt. All these terrible things. But anyway, he's a premier character in California political history. And of course, she was sort of his mentor. And of course, they dated and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, Donald Trump says,
well, I know Willie Brown very well. In fact, I went down in a helicopter with him. We thought maybe this is the end. We were in a helicopter going to a certain location together. And there was an emergency landing. This was not a pleasant landing. And Willie was, he was a little concerned. So I know him pretty well. I haven't seen him in years. But he told me terrible things about her. But this is what you're telling me anyway, I guess. But he had a big part in what happened with Kamala. But he I don't know, maybe he's changed his tune, but he was not a fan of hers very much at that point.
Mountains and mountains of bullshit. But I really want to make clear, Willie Brown deserves it. And the whole, of course, it's so on brand for him to be doing some squirrely deal with Donald Trump. Okay, whatever. So anyway, what's so delectable about this is that Willie Brown, of course, was interviewed about this. And Willie Brown said, I've never been in a helicopter with Donald Trump. And people are going, wait, what? And he goes, I've never been in a helicopter. And he goes, and the thing is, Willie Brown is, again, a raconteur, a crazy guy, a man about town. And as he said, do you think that if that had happened to me, I would never have talked about it? Okay. So then what was so interesting, the Times did a story about it, said, oh, Donald Trump said he nearly went down a helicopter with Willie Brown. There's some problems with his story. Okay. So they go into that. Donald Trump calls up the New York Times and says, you're 100% wrong. Okay. I have the flight records to prove it, and I'm going to sue you.
Yeah.
Now, that's kind of interesting because his whole way he operates is he says all the stuff that isn't true, and then he just moves on. And as a reporter, I'm always interested when you write something or someone writes something about someone and someone stands up and says, that's not only wrong, it's 100% wrong, and I can prove it. That's interesting to me.
Just before you go on, can I just kind of say my favorite part of that article was this quote from the New York Times. When asked to produce the flight records, Mr. Trump responded mockingly, repeating the request in a sing-song voice.
Right. And I have will I produce the flight records, Yeah. But still, it is kind of interesting. And again, just because in terms of libel and defamation in America, that's a red line.
Yeah.
If you say, oh, so-and-so did something, Chaz, you were at this particular restaurant a particular night, and you say, actually, I wasn't, and I have a receipt from a restaurant on the other side of town for that night. All of a sudden, you go ding, 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 because if that's true, I want to know it, and I need to correct it, right?
Yes.
So it's kind of an interesting thing when he said that. So I was interested in it just because I thought, well, maybe there's something going on here. I didn't quite. So anyway, we found out what the answer was. And the answer was he did nearly go down in a helicopter, okay? But it was a different black guy, just to speak very crudely. It was a former Los Angeles city council person, and it was in New Jersey. And so it really did happen, and they did have a rough landing, okay? And so someone tracked down the guy who and he'd been telling this story for years. And I guess he's like 90 years old now. And of course, he said what you'd expect, which is, I guess we all look alike to him.
Yeah. Because this guy's also very tall, whereas Willie Brown is short.
Well, he's short, yeah.
Yeah.
But then another final thing is that Trump did some sort of stupid coffee table book 10 years ago where he told that story that he was in it with Willie Brown.
Yeah.
And he got that wrong.
Yeah.
But anyway, the thing we can't remember is that he was completely lying about Willie Brown like he could have been in the helicopter with this other guy, but that guy probably wasn't dissing Kamala Harris.
Well, probably not in 1990 when she was just a low-level prosecutor at that point in time.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just totally ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so it's this astonishing Trump thing where he actually had half of it right, but the half that wasn't right embarrassed himself 10 times more than he even normally does.
Yeah.
And again, in an incredibly offensive way to African Americans. And then another incredibly sexist way, like, oh, I was talking, because the way he talks about it would be very crude. Oh, yeah, he was banging her and he said that da-da-da-da-da. I mean, just a crude formulation of him. That's incredibly sexist and turns off women, and women know people like that as well. So it was just another one of these great Rococo Trump buffooneries at these press conferences, and but it was particularly delightful.
Actually, this was incredible the way this played out. Just how high profile the failure was. But I actually don't think that was his worst moment at the press conference.
Yeah, that's possibly true.
I think his worst moment at the press conference was the mifepristone question. Do you remember that? He was asked about whether he would ban mifepristone, and actually, rather than playing Trump Trump responding, because it's actually hard to understand him a bit. He's a bit mumbly and it's hard to really. The audio was terrible. I'm going to play Lawrence O'Donnell reading it out because Lawrence O'Donnell has a beautiful voice. It's very clear.
Yeah.
And he's not verbaling him. This is literally what it's just very clear. It's much clearer when Lawrence O'Donnell does it. So this is just a reenactment of the mifepristone answer.
When Donald Trump was asked a good question by NBC's Garrett Haake. Question: would you direct the FDA to revoke access to mifepristone? Here is what Donald Trump said to that yes or no question, which no matter how many times you read this answer, is not an answer. Trump: sure, you could do things that would supplement, absolutely. And those things are pretty open and humane. But you have to be able to have a vote. After all, all I want to do is give everybody a vote. And the votes are taking place right now as we speak. But it's there are many things on a humane basis that you can do outside of that, but you also have to give a vote. And the people are going to have to decide. The words Donald Trump spoke to those reporters in response to that clear, simple, and important yes or no question were an insult to everyone in that room, and they took the insult. Nothing in those words was an answer, nothing.
That's hilarious. You're right.
So angry.
That is so great.
I should say that his campaign later, because a lot of people took that answer, that complete non-answer, as saying essentially him not denying that he's going to ban it, and so saying, oh, he's reopened the idea of banning mifepristone. His campaign said that some of the questions at the briefing were difficult to hear. Now, look, I'll give him a ban from the doubt on that. Because I know one of the things about Trump, that answer made no sense at all. And one of the things we know about Trump is that he's addicted to not admitting that he didn't understand something.
Oh, yeah.
Like it's part of his macho thing. He just never, ever, ever will concede that he's confused about anything. He'll always bluff. If he's on the auto cue and he screws up the auto cue, he'll try and bluff his way around. And it always looks worse. Always looks worse. It makes him look like an idiot. Half the time he does that, people think, oh, that's evidence of senility. But I know what he's doing. What he's doing is just refusing to admit that he's confused or misunderstanding or doesn't know what's going on. I think that's what was happening there. And she said his position on mifepristone remains the same. The Supreme Court unanimously decided on the issue and the matter is settled, which is what he said at the debate.
The federal government still plays a role in whether or not women have access to abortion pills. They're used in about 2/3 of all abortions. As president, would you block abortion medication?
First of all, the Supreme Court just approved the abortion pill, and I agree with their decision to have done that, and I will not block it.
And I believe that's his position. Whether he means it, whether he'll stick to it is another thing altogether. But it's just really interesting how just his psychology leads him into these horrible situations that are just so bad. And this is another example of that.
Yeah,
It's
he
just
was
all
obviously uncomfortable with it. And I think that's a good point. Maybe he didn't hear. I was also thinking, I remember now about this, that he knew it had something to do with abortion, but there's a number of things that have like kind of big multisyllabic words. And what I think he was doing, he was getting back in that thing about, hey, we returned it to the states. People are going to vote in the states and to decide. But he didn't have quite the presence of mind to say, look, this is going to be dependent now on a state-by-state basis. That's what happened with Roe. That's what I support.
Anyway, I've got a question for you about this press conference. I'm going to play a clip from Lawrence O'Donnell, and then we're going to talk about it.
None of the networks, none of them, carried Kamala Harris's speech live after the Trump appearance. None of them. This network brought you the last few minutes of Kamala Harris's speech live, but was actually doing Olympics coverage when the speech began, which all of the networks knew was coming. They knew what time it was coming. They knew how to cover it live, and they didn't. After giving Donald Trump more than an hour of live coverage on all of their networks. It's 2016 all over again. The same mistakes are being made. I have never seen an industry slower at learning from its own stupid mistakes than the American news business.
Has he got a point, Bill?
I got two things I just want to say really quickly.
Yeah.
One, I hate MSNBC so much. Okay, it is the biggest bunch of boring blowhards I have ever heard. Joe Scarborough, what just a searching buffoon, self-absorbed, narcissistic, full of himself dork. Rachel Maddow, I think, is the most boring person on earth. I also have an issue with both Brian Williams, who I think isn't there anymore, and Joy Reid, both of whom are complete fabulous and should not be allowed to be in a news program. They're just big liars. They're proven liars. And you should just say, look, I'm sorry, you can go be a celebrity, but you're not allowed to be a news announcer here. Now, Lawrence O'Donnell is a very smart guy. He's had an amazing history. But, that high dudgeon he speaks and, just stop it. But it does remind me of one other thing, because he has had an amazing career in politics.
Absolutely.
And also in Hollywood. He was one of the main consultants on West Wing, which reminds me, another of my pet things of this election. This is going to be the West Wing election. Okay. And there's a lot of people, young people are going to be, enthused in various ways. Obviously, different groups like East Asian or South Asian Americans and African Americans and women and all this crazy stuff. And West Wing was a very, very big TV show. Yeah. Okay. And it was all about the idealism and people who were, people forget, Democrats are a little bit randy, they're happy to have sex and, they get a little, whatever, but they're principled and they're well educated and they do what's right. And sometimes they're doing something a little mysterious, but it's because they're really doing something really principled, but they don't want to talk about it. I mean, there's all these Aaron Sorkin cliches, but this is a West Wing election. And Kamala Harris is starting out with a very, very high-minded campaign. Walz completely buys into that. They have an incredible foil in Donald Trump. And they're also smarter than the other side. They seem to have right on their side, which is a lot of fun. So that's another thing I think about this election, that there's also now, a lot of those people were Democrats anyway, obviously, because West Wing was liberal porn. But there is another thing they have going for it, that Trump was a familiar TV presence, but what the Democratic Party is doing does have a West Wing echo that I think a lot of people are going to respond well to.
They're certainly trying to have a West Wing echo, that's for sure. But to answer the question, Lawrence O'Donnell asked, does he have a legitimate point that the news media in 2016 gave Donald Trump endless airtime that they didn't give to Hillary Clinton, and they enabled his success? And Lawrence O'Donnell saying you're doing it all over again.
Yeah.
Is he right?
I don't know. It's one of these things. It's like It's basically true. But the problem is that people watched it. If people didn't watch it, he wouldn't be on the air. And, this gets into Jeff Zucker, who is a menace to society. He was running CNN at the time. It's a commercial enterprise. They're going to put stuff on the air that they can get viewers on within reason, and they thought that was within reason. And what the Democrats have to do is come up with an equally appealing thing. Now, I personally think the Kamala Harris thing was pretty, I've been sort of noticing they've been being run. So I don't actually know, but I think that there's going to be a coalition of people in those networks who aren't going to let that go on too far. So maybe he has a point. I bet it'll be rectified.
To be honest, I don't think he has a point. I think he might have a point in that one occasion, but like we just said, Trump isn't campaigning much.
Yeah.
He's what they say is Lawrence O'Donnell suggesting they shouldn't air his interviews? Of course they should air his interviews and his press conferences. If Harris wants that same airtime, she should hold a press conference instead of running away the whole bloody time. Look, to be honest, I talk about this at length in Planet America tomorrow. I've just written a script, so I'm not going to rehash it here. But I think she's got very good reason for not holding press conferences and not doing interviews. It's smart. She's following a small target strategy, a lot like Kevin 07. Trump wants her to hold press conferences and interviews because he wants something to attack her with. And she's giving him nothing. Even in the 71 seconds when she spoke to reporters on the tarmac the other day, each answer was one sentence long.
What you got?
President Trump had a press conference today. He talked about a lot of things. I wonder if you have a reaction to what he talked about.
Well, I'm glad that he's finally agreed to a debate on September 10th. I'm looking forward to it and hope he shows up.
Are you open to more debates?
I am happy to have that conversation about an additional debate for after September 10th, for sure.
He proposed two more debates.
Like I said, happy to have that conversation.
Why do you think he pulled out of the debate with you? Why do you think
I am beyond trying to speculate about how he thinks.
What else? Can you comment on some of his other criticisms? He made a whole litany of them today. Some of them are about
I was too busy talking to voters. I didn't hear them.
Some of the criticism has been about your vice presidential pick and his leaving the National Guard at 24 years. Vance said that he deserted his own troops or his own colleagues. What's your take on that?
Listen, I praise anyone who has presented themselves to serve our country. And I think that we all should.
She gave them nothing. She gave them the exact answer that she wanted to give. Nothing more, nothing less. Trump could do nothing with any of that. So that's the game she's playing. She's giving him nothing to attack. It makes sense. But that means you're not going to get an hour's worth of attention if you're not giving them anything, are you? Sure, her rallies, they were on TV when they started, but if she's just done 10 rallies in a row, which she has, where they're all identical, you can't expect them to keep on airing them.
Yeah, and plus it's a very old school attack too, because so much of it comes across in TikTok and in Facebook and in Twitter. Yeah, people see.
Of course,
it's much more punchy to have not even to watch the whole thing, but just see the three best lines.
Totally. In 2016, the thing that sucked was they kept on playing the same thing over and over again from Trump. They were giving him infomercials essentially. That sucked. But that's not what's happening now. What's happening now is he's getting airtime when he's giving them something that's new.
Yeah.
And if Kamala Harris wants to give them something new, then they'll play it. But until then, they're not going to, and that's okay. Everyone's doing their job as far as I'm concerned. I'm not angry at anyone. The news media is doing their job. They're putting new stuff to air. Kamala Harris is doing her job, trying to win the election, giving Trump nothing. And Trump is doing his job, trying to goad her into giving him something. Everyone's doing their job. Now, at some point in time, it becomes irresponsible of Kamala Harris to be so preoccupied with winning that she's giving the voters nothing to vote on, in which case she's treating the voters with disrespect. I don't think we're there yet. We're getting close to there, though. At some point in time, people need to know what they're voting for. The mail-in voting starts in less than a month. At some point in time, she needs to give them something. Yeah. And so I feel like she needs to do interviews soon. But so far, she's just doing her job. And so far, I think everyone's just been quite smart about this. And I think Lawrence O'Donnell is just blowing steam. myself.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think we also have to remember that, again, when the history of these are written, what all those people in her campaign are doing are concentrating on independent voters in 7 states. That's what they're doing.
Now, there's a couple of times I want to hit this button today. If we got the time, hopefully, we've got about 50 minutes left. This is the first time.
What time is it?
It's policy time.
What time is it? It's policy time.
Yeah, I've been waiting for this. I've been waiting for this for so long to talk about some policy. Not that there's much, but there's a little bit. So let's talk about some. Then we'll take a little Walz break, and then we'll do a bit more. So I want to talk about the campaign trail policy quickly. Then I'll talk hopefully about the Supreme Court. Okay. Kamala Harris has not been doing a lot of policy. She's been doing a lot of personality, a lot of bio, a lot of character, a lot of vibes, not a lot of policy. On her first rally, she said that building up the middle class will be a defining goal of my presidency. When our middle class is strong, America is strong. What she's saying there is, I'm continuing Biden. That's what she's saying. That was Biden's thing. I mean, they're using different words, but that's the Biden thing, the middle class. She said she believes in a future where no child has to grow up in poverty, where every person can buy a home, start a family, and build wealth, and where every person has access to paid family leave and affordable childcare. No child shall be in poverty, Belv. What could possibly go wrong with that? Once again, as a new Australian, you won't know what I'm talking about there, but anyone who's over 50, who's Australian, knows exactly what I'm talking about. And what I'm talking about is this.
By 1990, no Australian child will be living in poverty.
Spoiler, they lived in poverty. They lived in a lot of poverty, and poor old Bob Hawke never really lived that down. Let's see if Kamala Harris has any more luck stopping all children from living in poverty. But her policies basically are Biden policies. Universal pre-K education, paid family leave, cheaper childcare, raising corporate taxes, all super vague. No numbers, nothing at all. That's it so far. Oh, except for ripping off Trump's no tax on tips policy.
Yeah.
The one new policy was the one she ripped off Trump. And Trump was really pissed off about that. I don't blame him. Like that is... And by the way, I did say it on this show, on this podcast, it's not a good policy.
It's a terrible policy. And it's not going to happen either.
Well, I don't know if it's going to happen.
It's not
why do you think it's not going to happen?
Because it's their income. It's not right for people to have an income and not be taxed on it.
Oh, and it's not right. I agree with that.
and they get 75 or 80 or 90% of their income is tips.
Yeah.
You know, people don't know this, that there's no minimum wage for waiters. You can get paid $2.50 an hour to be a waiter, $2.50.
Yeah.
But if you're working at a high-end restaurant, you can make $500-$600 a night.
Totally.
And that was before I left 5 or 6 years ago. I mean, I had a lot of friends. I don't want to say a lot of friends, but I've had friends who live like kings, and that's in a crappy little city back in Washington or New York. You got people who are making a lot of money on that, and they should be taxed, and nobody's going to take the tax. It's completely unfair.
Yeah, well, of course, the people who are the lowest paid people in the hospitality industry don't get tips. The dishwashers and those guys.
Yeah, they have what they do is they split the tips in a lot of places. So it's very controversial. In a lot of restaurants, you give a tip, but the tip doesn't go to your waiter. It all goes into a pool. 20% of it goes to the dishwashers, 5% to the maitre d'. It's very complicated. But what happened that's so polar, where this comes from is that X number of years ago, I forget what it is, the IRS said, basically what we're going to do, we're just going to, of course you're supposed to report your tips, but of course nobody did. And they basically said, you know what, we're just going to assume you got this many tips and we're going to tax you on it. Okay, so that became this polarizing thing. But again, it's their income. They have to get taxed on it. And if they're working in very cheap restaurants where they don't make much money, then they shouldn't have to pay many taxes.
Well, I was going to say, the other thing about this policy that makes it so terrible is just everyone's going to classify everything as a tip. It's just going to encourage tax avoidance in a massive way.
Yeah, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
But I think this is all about Nevada.
Yeah, oh, no kidding.
It's Nevada.
Sorry to be so sarcastic, but yeah, of course it's about Nevada.
And what we should be happy about is that for once the Democrats aren't going, oh, he really beat us on that tips thing. They're just doing it and just moving on, which I think is a good example of the asymmetricality I was talking about. They're just going, let's just do it and then let Trump yell about it. It's like, hey, and again, nobody's paying attention. And now, some people heard about the no tax on tips thing from it, but now both of them are saying it. So everyone's going, oh, okay, I don't have to worry about this anymore. And nobody, of course, is going to say, look, it's not ever going to happen.
Well, I've just told you the entirety of the Kamala Harris policy agenda at this point in time. But Trump's got another one from the last week, which Kamala Harris can rip off in 2 months' time, which is this.
But I will not cut 1 cent from Social Security or Medicare. And I kept my promise for 4 years that I will keep it again. And seniors should not pay taxes on Social Security. And they won't. They won't.
Okay, so obviously there's a bit of a theme forming in his policies, just no tax on X, no tax on Y, whoever I'm trying to pander to at any given moment. Old people were very pro-Biden. We'll see if they're pro-Harris or not, but he's not taking any chances. So no tax on Social Security benefits. Do you have any thoughts about that before I go into it?
I just don't think that's going to happen either. I mean, I think there's actually a case to be made for it, but I mean, you have to.
It used to happen. They only started taxing them in 1983.
Yeah.
So they can untax them if they want.
Yeah. I forgot about that. I didn't know that. That's under RayGun too. Yeah.
Yeah. It's part of the deal.
It's not going to happen.
It's part of the deal to keep Social Security solvent.
Yeah. And it's funny, what they don't talk about is the most important thing that's happened in American taxation in the past 20 years probably is the thousands new IRS agents that came to bear under Biden, because there is a lot of tax avoidance in America, and that's a really, really, really bad thing. Because you really want a much more fair tax system, and it's great that they're going to have a lot more people, because I forget what the statistic is, but every IRS agent you hire pays for him or herself by like 8 times or 12 times or 22 times. It's some ridiculous metric.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to tell you what I think about the Social Security thing. It can happen. Well, we'll see. I hope it doesn't happen. Like I said, the whole reason tax was introduced was to keep the system solvent. And the system's got its own problems right now, even without removing taxes. But if you remove taxes, you're removing revenue. So you're making the system in even more trouble. So okay, how much damage are we talking about here? Let's get some numbers going. There's people whose job it is to crunch them, and I'm going to bring them to you. In 2023, the Social Security Trust Fund received $51 billion from taxes. That's about 3.8% of the total Social Security income that year. Since the relevant income thresholds aren't linked to inflation at all that we're talking about here, the amount paid in tax increases every year. So the CBO projects in 2033 it will yield $110 billion in taxes, which is 5.8% of total Social Security income that year. That's what we're talking about. But it doesn't just go to Social Security, it also goes to Medicare as well. Medicare received $35 billion of the Social Security taxes in 2023, 8.4% of its total income. Projected to be $95 billion in 2033, which is 14% of their total income. So what's the effect on this? The effect is you reduce income for both programs by $1.6 trillion over 10 years, which as a result of that, according to the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, would move Social Security's insolvency date from 2033 down to 2032 and Medicare's from 2036 to 2030. Just to resolve just that one move. But maybe that's worth it. What are the Social Security payees receiving as a result of this? They're receiving, on average, 0.9% extra after-tax income on their Social Security benefits in order to shave 6 years off the life of the Medicare Trust Fund. I'm not sure that's a good trade. It's not progressive either, because retirees with a yearly combined income of less than $25,000 if they're singles or $32,000 as couples don't pay taxes on Social Security benefits at all. Between $25,000 and $34,000 if they're singles or $32,000 and $44,000 if they're couples, they pay 50% of their benefits can be taxed. Not they pay 50% tax. 50% is taxable as regular income. And over that number, 85% of their benefits are taxable as income. So what does that mean? That means 60% of beneficiaries don't pay any tax. Yeah. You're talking about the top 40% of beneficiaries here who benefit from this. And so that's who the policy's helping, rich old people. And you know what? Old people, as a rule, are richer than everyone else anyway. They used to be the poorest. That's why Social Security was brought in the first place. But things have changed since then. According to Brian Riedel, who's the budget wonk of all budget wonks, seniors have the lowest poverty rate of any age group, and their average household incomes have grown 4 times as fast as the average worker since 1980. So this is distributing money from lower income groups to higher income groups. Now, some Democrats accuse Trump of cutting Social Security by doing this because he's cutting $1.6 billion of their revenue, which is, that's a tricky thing to try. I think it's a bit unfair, to be honest. Like, he's not cutting from Social Security. He's just making the system less stable, yes, but he's not actually cutting Social Security. But, in my view, the Democrats are in on this as well. They've had bills trying to do this. Trump's not the only one trying to do this. House Democrats have tried to do this. They tried to do this year. So it's a bipartisan push for fiscal irresponsibility here. Social Security, also on top of that, Tim Walz signed legislation that exempted Social Security benefit payments from state taxes. Last year. Yeah. So Tim Walz is in on this as well. So it's kind of interesting. It's actually great politics from Trump. Like the tips one is great politics. I mean, the guy can do politics. It's great politics because it panders to old people. Who's going to criticize him for helping out old people, even though they really should, because old people don't need the help? But who's going to criticize him? No one. And if they did, he'd just go, well, you first. What about Tim Walz?
That's a good point.
Yeah, so it's a perfect policy from a political point of view, but from an economic point of view, it's just vandalism. So that's my take on that one. Do you have anything to add?
No, I like I said, I'm old enough that the concerns about the solvency of Medicare and Social Security, every 10 years, there's these worries, there's projections, everyone talks about it. The Democrats accuse the Republicans of wanting to cut Social Security. And you know how we talk about the libertarians in Washington, who I used to be friends with. And during the Bush administration, they got in the room with the Cato Institute and those people got in the room with Bush about, privatizing Social Security. There's all these concerns about it. And there's deep in the Republican coalition is a desire to screw up the system. So even though the Democrats often exaggerate the right's threat to it, there's a lot of scaremongering on the left. It's also true that the Republicans are trying to get rid of that, and they're very irresponsible overseers of it. But basically, I think there's going to be these crises, and then they're finally going to come to a deal, and they're going to say, okay, we've made it sure that it's going to be solvent through 2034. And then in 2030, 2031, people are going to, through 2040. And then in the early 2030s, people are going to say, oh, it's going to be insolvent in 2040. We have to do something. So
I'll tell you exactly what they're going to do. I've said this on the PEP before, and if I don't know if PEP's going to be going by the time it goes insolvent, but if it does, I'll tell you exactly what they're going to do. Insolvent doesn't mean it ends. It just means they just have an automatic 23% cut. What they're going to do is they'll just stop linking Social Security and Medicare to the taxes. They'll just take it out of general revenue. And they'll just keep on paying the same thing. Yeah. And then there'll just be an extra $1 trillion on the deficit.
Yeah.
That's what's going to happen. Yeah, that's what's actually going to happen. But at some point in time, there's going to be too much of a deficit.
No, I take your point on that. But honestly, the two parties do ultimately come together. I mean, this is what I was talking about Biden before. Once in a while, you do have these presidents who they came out of the Congress and managed to put these huge legislations together just the same way LBJ did. And even Obama, who came out of Senate too. They do find a way to muddle through this. They really do.
And the way is going to be just taking more money, just writing more blank checks. That's what the way is going to be. There's certainly not going to be, the way is not going to be reducing Social Security payments. I promise you that. They're not going to do that. No politician is going to agree to putting their neck on the line by reducing the payments of Social Security.
Right. Though I honestly do think they're going to raise the retirement age at some point. I really honestly do.
I don't think they are.
And it's funny because they're such bad messengers, because I just think that most Americans, if you said, look, when Social Security started, the average American died at 55, and now the average American dies at 82. And they're just getting decades more payments. This system doesn't work. I mean, that's something I think Americans get, and but nobody makes that case outside of the Cato Institute.
Look, we probably shouldn't spend too much time on this, but because I don't have the numbers in front of me as well. But honestly, this is one of those ones where I'm pretty economic rationalist, but I don't think they should do that. I actually don't think, like leaving aside politics, I actually don't think it's good policy. And the reason I say that is because Americans aren't living longer. They did live longer up to a point, up to like the 80s and maybe early 90s. But the people who need Social Security, which is not the rich people are living longer, but the poor people aren't living longer. The poor people are dying soon after they hit Social Security level. They're not living to be 80. Poor people, no poor people are living to be 80 or 85. Poor people are dying in their early 70s and their late 60s. Like the numbers are pretty clear. They live terrible lives, and they work hard. And if they retire early in their hard jobs, they get less Social Security because that's how it works. And if they don't retire early, they end up dying 3 years after they get to Social Security.
Oh, we should both research this, but my understanding is that notwithstanding what you said, the longevity of Americans is a lot older now than it was in 1930.
Oh, yeah, in 1936. But I'm saying the last time they increased the retirement age was 1983. And I'm telling you now, the poor are not living longer than they did in 1983.
Okay, I'll look it up.
Yeah, yeah, it's at most to be a year or two. At most. It's certainly not what you think.
Okay.
But anyway, look,
Okay.
that's another time.
What next?
You were going to talk about what you thought was going to shape the future.
Well, I was, and actually, I think I hit most of them, like about the Murdoch and about. I just kind of wanted to just get a few things on the record, but the main when I looked over my notes, the main thing is this is going to be a very unusual election, and right now the dynamic is that she's surging. She's going to continue to surge for at least 2 weeks and probably 2.5 weeks. Okay. So to the end of the week after the Democratic convention. Okay. So then we have to watch what's happening. And if this momentum keeps and she has even higher, she's not going to go too much higher. She can't, right? That the Trump people are going to throw a lot of spaghetti at the wall to figure out what's going to go on. And then to the extent that continues, that's going to build on itself. Like he's going to get crazier. Rupert Murdoch is going to be looking at him, whatever. The Democrats are going to be more emboldened. They're going to go into North Carolina, maybe even Texas. You just don't know what sort of things could be going on. So it's going to be a really crazy strategic election like we haven't seen. Like people forget, Obama stole Indiana under the nose of the Republicans in 2008, it was, right? But right now, everyone is so much more aware of what's happened. Everyone is so much more conscious of the thing. And so, the Trump people are going to be, in theory, protecting their flank in North Carolina. Oh, but then, again, you have this thing where Trump is so tactical and he just doesn't think of the future. And so they have a terrible, terrible candidate in that in the North Carolina race. That crazy
Mark
guy.
Robinson, yeah.
And so, North Carolina could be a really competitive state, and that could be someone who becomes very, very polarizing. You've got a bunch of bozos in Arizona running. You've got the abortion initiative probably in Arizona and some other states. So you have all these things that, the consequences of decisions the Republicans made X number of months or years ago that are all going to factor into this. It could be. And I don't want to sound like I'm wish casting and stuff like this, but you could see a lot of them having a pretty pronounced effect in some unexpected ways. So I've always thought that Arizona was never going to not be a problem. Georgia still might, and we'll see how she does in the Midwest.
I continue to think North Carolina is in play, but we'll see. Oh, by the way, just from before with the Social Security thing, I just want to say one thing from the economic. Once again, I don't want to take it up, but just from an economic rationalist point of view, if you want to save Social Security, what I think you should do is not lift the retirement age. It's tax everyone because at the moment the taxes stop at a certain level. I forgot what the number is. I think it's $180,000 a year. Tax everyone, all income, all the way up.
Yeah,
That's the first thing you should do to raise more revenue. The second thing you should do is stop giving it to rich people.
Yeah.
Like
means testing.
Yeah. Lefties hate when you do that because they say that turns it into welfare, and that's the beginning of the end of that particular program. You need for it to be universal in order for everyone to have buy-in and to support into the future. I don't know if that's the case or not, but just to me, I always just think to myself, raise more money from the rich, give less to the rich. That will keep it going for a long time as far as dollars and cents go. But, and
there's so
people
many,
can disagree.
And there's so many taxes in America that are just so regressive, like the gas tax. And there's just all these other things that even taxes on groceries and stuff are incredibly regressive. Yeah. And so I'm always in favor of being more progressive. So.
But anyway, okay, now I'm looking at the time here. I'm not going to do my Tim Walz section.
Okay.
But you can. Do you have anything to say about Tim Walz?
I just want to say one thing that I mentioned this on the phone the other day, that he's a type, and I don't know if he resonates in Australia the same way he does in America. And this avuncular coach type guy, which is why they call him coach and stuff like this. And I assume that you have that figurehead here. But he is very avuncular. He's very funny. He obviously has a sense of humor. He's mischievous. He's got a great story. He knows how to tell it. He came up in a red district, blah, blah, blah. But he's also steely. And so I want to just mention two things about it. Like, he's the kind of guy that if you're in a bar, like, I don't live in bars or anything like this, but the cliche of like a frat boy in a bar bothering some woman, and then Tim Walz is behind you, he taps you on the shoulder, goes, "Hey, son, why don't you leave her alone?" And it's the classic movie thing that he kind of ignores and goes, "Hey, Pops, mind your own business." Yeah. Okay. And Tim Walz is the kind of guy, the guy goes back to bothering the girl, and all of a sudden there's a hand on your shoulder. And he just, it's not an archetype, but it's a character in America that really, really resonates. And it's hard to put your finger on it, but there's this steeliness, like you wouldn't want to get into a fight with him in an alley. Okay, you'd come out of it bad. And that leads me to the second thing, which is, it is very peculiar, like I said before, because Hillary Clinton was a happy warrior. Hillary Clinton was tough on foreign affairs. She had command. She had all this experience, all these things that Republicans said they like. And that doesn't always happen. And Trump had this dark vision. He had this apocalyptic vision. He was hostile. He was weird. He was a obviously a crook and a shyster. But he did have that familiarity, having been in people's rooms. I think that's one of my theories too, and not just my theory, that a lot of people like me never ever paid attention to The Apprentice, but people who did watch it, it becomes part of your life and you feel you know the person. But there is this factor. And so what I'm saying is, so I don't want to overstate this because it doesn't always happen, the happy warrior or whatever, but you got to admit that right now Harris and Walz are very likable. Like, they just are. And he's just a funny guy. He smiles. He's having a lot of fun. He genuflects to the crowd. She does as well. She's got that church thing going on that's very trusting, that's going to resonate with people. And I kind of hate when people talk about people's physical appearance and miens and stuff like this, but Trump isn't that likable, really. Some people like him, but a lot of people don't like him, and he's not likable. J.D. Vance, I don't think, is very likable. That's not really his fault, and I hate to bring it up, but he does seem to be smug. He's hostile. He's cruel. He's vulgar. He says things that aren't true and doesn't care.
All I'd say about, look, I rate J.D. Vance more than most people do, to be honest. I think he's a smart guy, but he's not a positive guy at all. No. He's miserable. And
again, thinking about this election is about the independent voters, right? Because no one's going to change the mind of Trump voters. No one's going to change the mind of people who don't like Trump. There's just some people who obviously aren't committed yet and who call themselves independent voters. And again, it's going to come down to the independent voters in those steps. So one of the great things about Walz, I heard a very smart political operative somewhere talking about this, that, Walz is the kind of guy that can peel off some rural votes in Georgia, Arizona, so even North Carolina, right? Even Texas. Just because of his likability, his relatability, his liking of guns, the football issue, all that stuff. I don't really think the military thing is going to go anywhere because they're really pushing back on it so hard. The attacks on his military record. But anyway, there is this. All I wanted to say is there is this real likability about them that I think is going to help them too.
You know what? I think I will do Tim Walz. I got Tim Walz left, and I got my Supreme Court policy time.
Okay, let's
left.
do those two things.
I'll do Supreme Court policy time with Dave. That's right. Let's go on Tim Walz because I think this is going a good place. I think that Tim Walz is an interesting character. I think that this is a really interesting time because he's so definable at this point in time because he's so not known at all. According to Morning Consult, 57% of people have never heard of Tim Walz at all, which was far more than 38% who hadn't heard of Mark Kelly and 35% who hadn't heard of Josh Shapiro. So he's so malleable, and right now he's up for grabs and everyone's trying to define him. But as you say, he is a bit of a jack-in-the-box on the campaign trail. Like he is irrepressible. He's got so much energy, which I think helps him a lot. As part of especially in this campaign environment. In a way, he acts, even though he looks like he's 150, he acts younger than Kamala Harris does. Like he's always bouncing around like a bunny rabbit, and then she puts up her hand to high five him, and he gives her a hug, and like it's just it's like he's kind of he's a force of nature a bit. And he's got interesting aspects. Like he does have that genuine working class vibe that Democrats never seem to have anymore. Like for instance, he doesn't have any stocks. It's so rare.
Oh yeah.
For a politician to not have any stocks. Like he's the one who was responsible for the Stock Act trying to stop insider trading like 12 years ago, and he stood by it. Like after it went through, obviously didn't have much of an effect, but he didn't then start getting stocks. 12 years later, he still has no stocks. You know, and he doesn't have a property portfolio. His only investments appear to be state pensions, and that's it. And it's which is that's a bit more working class than you're used to from a politician. You know, he's never published a book. He doesn't have all the ways that politicians make money on the side. He does not do, which is refreshing. And I think it's an opportunity. They should make something of this. They should try to push some legislation, some anti-corruption legislation about this kind of stuff. He's the figurehead. If they don't do it in the campaign trail, if they ever win the presidency, they should definitely get him to spearhead something like that. He'd be the perfect, and it would be good populist fare, you know? But it's funny because the Republicans are desperately trying to find him and they just can't. They tried to get him back for the couch thing. I'm not sure if you saw this. It was online. The right wingers online were trying to get a thing about him swallowing horse jizz, right? Like they tried to start their own rumor. Like JD Vance's rumor was he screwed a couch. So this rumor is that, did you hear that Tim Walz was caught sucking a horse's cock, and they had this fake newspaper article that went around, and it just didn't work because obviously it's just the same thing. It doesn't work when you're doing the same thing back at them. You got to be creative about it. These guys are so used to being an echo chamber. They're not used to being creative and doing something new, you know?
Yeah. Can I say one quick thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
And the interesting thing about the couch thing, obviously, the guy just made it up. He wasn't trying to start a rumor. It was just an absurd joke, And then, but the funny thing is, it got picked up because I think people thought it's fun because the Republicans say so many vulgar, awful things about Democrats, much, by orders of magnitude. And the exaggerations and the deliberate lies and stuff like this. It's kind of a performance thing. It's kind of a fun joke. I mean, they're not like, everyone knows it's not true. They're just having fun because it's like, for once we have this funny thing that driving the other people crazy. And then there is this real elegance, where you give this speech, J.D. Vance is this and J.D. Vance is that and J.D. Vance did this. And I just think you should get up off of the couch and debate me. That little zinger at the end. They're kind of elegant.
Well, this is not elegant. This is Donald Trump Jr.'s tweet. I'm just putting it up here. Listen, stolen valor is about as bad as it gets, but what's this I'm hearing about? A horse. And you got this got milk thing, and there's like a horse, and J.D. Vance has white on his upper lip, and it's not going to work, guys. The reason you haven't heard of it, and I bet you people at home hadn't heard of it, is because it's going nowhere, because it's just not funny, and it's unoriginal, and it's coming from a place of bitterness. It's not fun.
Yeah.
Like it just seems kind of sad. They've tried calling him weird. They've tried to do the weird thing back on
they
him.
throw the weird thing.
Yeah,
it's very sad.
which is also it's just unoriginal and sad. And it's the Data for Progress, by the way, had a poll. Does the word weird more accurately describe the Democrats or Republicans? 47% said it was more fitting for Republicans. 37% said the same for Democrats. I don't actually know if that's the case or whatever. It just shows that their weird judo move isn't working. Anyway, Jesse Waters tried this very strange attack.
Here's Twitchy Tim on stage, waving profusely in a very unsettling manner. Very unsettling. Men should not move this way. It's not the way we move. And the handshake is probably the most telling. This is Waltz and his wife shaking hands like business associates, followed by a weird hug. Now let's compare that to Waltz's interaction with Kamala's husband, Doug. Interesting. What's going on here?
You were convinced by that?
Yeah, they're just very heavy-handed. And, I have to say that Gutfeld, they really have pulled something off where he has something that is in the realm of what you call a comedy show that's finally been successful on the right that they've been trying to do for decades, literally. But it does feel very, very, very sour in a way that Jon Stewart never really did.
But especially because when you look at that clip they just played about the hug, the shaking his hand of his wife, he's screwing around. He's clearly having fun.
Yeah.
If you're sitting there acting like the old dudes in the Muppets, like getting all bitter about people having fun, you just look like a loser.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. They've been trying to attack him for being being left-wing. And look, and he did have some left-wing policies. We talked about this last week. He had some left-wing policies and some not so left-wing policies when he was in Minnesota as the governor. But the one they seem to have gone hardest on is this tampon Tim thing, which once again, I don't think it works. We talked about last week. I said it was an anti-poverty measure that wasn't about trans issues. Some peppers asked how it could possibly not be trans-related to force feminine hygiene products into boys' bathrooms. Let me read you the text. This is the text of the law. A school district or charter school must provide students with access to menstrual products at no charge. The products must be available to all menstruating students in restrooms regularly used by students in grades 4 to 12 according to a plan developed by the school district. For purposes of this section, menstrual products means pads, tampons, or other similar products used in connection with menstrual cycle. The key words are according to a plan developed by the school district. It's up to the school. They don't mention boys' bathrooms. Yeah. They don't say boys' bathrooms. They say all menstruating people need to have access to these products according to a plan by the school district. Now, you might go, oh, you're just being finicky with language here. No, I'm not, because I've read how it works in Minnesota. In the largest school district in Minnesota, they don't have a single sanitary napkin in a boy's bathroom. Not in one. Not in one. They're in non-gender specific bathrooms. They're in women's bathrooms, and they're with the school nurse. That's what happens in Minnesota. That's what actually happens. So this is just fiction, this whole boys' bathrooms thing. And who is going to, by the way, do you think Kamala Harris is sad about the Republicans publicizing the fact that her ticket is all about free tampons for women? Yeah. She'd be loving this. Yeah. It's a terrible attack. Anyway, go on. Yeah.
Well, and just the other thing that there's this, maybe this is just me, but I think most people are thinking that they wouldn't last in the boys' bathrooms. I mean, the boys would just raid them all. You know what I mean? It's just like, and they'd be throwing around in the classroom and they'd be setting them on fire and just doing all these disgusting, stuffing it down each other's pants and stuff like that.
So right, of course they would.
And that, of course, every single school is going to have them in the girls' bathroom, and then everyone's going to know they can go to the nurse. Like, that's the most important thing, is that there's just the publicity of it that's saying, hey, if there's an issue, go to the nurse, she'll take care of you. And that's just... It's just such a dumb issue. And again, it's hateful. It's like polarizing to moms, because fathers are just kind of going, whatever, right? But every mom in the world is worried about what happens to her daughter when it comes to stuff like this. And just knowing that, hey, the nurse is there, it's available, everything's going to take care of her. It's just something to make ridicule that is just so polarizing and stupid.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to do the military thing quickly now.
Okay, cool.
And because Dave did it last week, but I hadn't read about it. And now I've read about it, and I've got more to add.
Okay.
Which is, okay, so I'm going to go through this fast. Oh, I'll try. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to split this up into its components. First of all, they said he was in war when he wasn't in war, okay? We all know the clip. It's this clip.
But we can do background checks. We can do CDC research. We can make sure we don't have reciprocal carry among states. And we can make sure that those weapons of war that I carried in war is the only place where those weapons are at.
If that's a one-off, then we move on, surely. Like that's a very simple, that's potentially just a simple error in wording.
Yep.
It was off the cuff after all. He was talking about gun control, not his war record. Easy to make those kinds of mistakes. But that fact that clip didn't come from Oppo research. It came from something that Kamala Harris's campaign tweeted out, which means there may be, the Oppo might not have even got to that yet. There may be 20 of them for all we know. Like it's an amazing coincidence that they happened to pick a clip that actually worked against them. Right?
Wait, who picked? Wait,
that was a clip that was tweeted out by Kamala Harris's campaign.
And so, are people saying that it's not right for him to say he carried it in war?
Yeah,
because he was deployed in Europe during the war.
But he was never in combat.
But he didn't say. Yeah. See, this is the thing. I just don't think that's going to go anywhere. I mean, he was in the military. He got sent to Europe to help supply the troops in wherever he was. That's war.
He was guarding an airport. That's what he was doing.
But yeah. I don't know. I don't think most people. It's just one of the. I mean, there's a couple of interesting things with him, but I just don't understand that resonance.
That's okay.
He was. But go ahead. But this thing, what happened during the Iraqi war was just terrible, and so many Americans got hurt during it. And there was, there's that whole issue of, because healthcare has gotten so much better, there have been so many grievous injuries, where people came home, and just before 20 years ago in the Vietnam War, they would have just died in the battlefield. But now they have limbs, they have, face things and rebuilding the side of your face that got blown off and stuff like that. This whole thing of like parsing on that level someone who was serving in the Iraq War essentially is, I don't think it's going to go ahead. Go ahead.
That's okay. That's all right. That's right. For what it's worth, CNN says there's more of them. We have that, but I haven't seen any of them. CNN haven't played any of them, so I don't know. As far as I'm concerned, that's nothing. I don't care about that. Okay, so this was a surprise PEP, and fittingly, there was a surprise in the surprise PEP, which was that the surprise card surprisingly was full. This has never happened to us before, and so we didn't record the last 20 minutes of the podcast. So I'm going to try and recount it for you. That is all coming to you on Just Unleashed. Surprise! Okay, so we were halfway through the Tim Walz military stuff, and I was going through I was about to tell you about the examples of Tim Walz using accurate phrases that he knows people will interpret in misleading ways. For instance, the idea of being a veteran of Operation Enduring Freedom. Now, Tim Walz first achieved public notoriety by protesting Bush back in 2004. This photo was from that protest. He was holding up a sign, as you can see, that says, "Enduring Freedom Veterans for Kerry." And there are many examples of Tim Walz describing himself as, quote, a veteran of Operation Enduring Freedom. Like, for instance, in his original announcement that he was running for Congress. And the thing is, this is true. This is accurate. He was a veteran of Operation Enduring Freedom. But it's also misleading because everyone who hears that phrase would assume that that means he served in Afghanistan or Iraq, but actually he served in Italy, guarding an airport that supplied the troops, which is fine. He did his job. It was a noble job. He did it. He did what was asked of him. I'm not dissing him. What I'm saying is that he must have known that people were getting the wrong idea about his service. And he was happy to let them have that wrong idea. Sometimes it was explicit. Part of his press pack that he set out in 2006 when he first ran for Congress featured a Wall Street Journal article that said Walz served overseas during the early war in Afghanistan. That's one of the articles he sent out in his press pack. Another article in his press pack that he sent out said that it had a section called Iraq War Veterans Running for Congress, and he was part of that section. Was that an accident? Did he know? Maybe, maybe not. Another example, this is probably the worst one. This is the one that Bill had a problem with. Tim Walz is being introduced on C-SPAN, and note how he's nodding along with the following introduction.
Congressman Tim Walz, also a member of the Armed Services Committee and Veterans Affairs, Democrat of Minnesota, highest ranking enlisted soldier ever to serve in Congress. Enlisted in the Army National Guard at 17 and retired 24 years later as Command Sergeant Major and served with his battalion at Operating Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan.
So that introduction was flat out wrong. She specifically said he served in Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan, and he allowed her to have that misapprehension. He just sat there nodding. But he was on TV. He might not have thought that he could butt into her intro. I've done that before where I've thought I don't have an opportunity to get in here, and I allowed something untrue to get on air just because I just didn't think I could find a way to stop it. That, by the way, is the only thing that Bill saw and all the things I talked about that bothered him at all. He thought it was a little dodgy. But other than that, I mean, he didn't think it was a sackable offence or hanging offence or anything, but he did think that was dodgy. And I think it was dodgy as well, although it's possible if you give him a benefit of the doubt on that as well. The next section. So we just talked about Tim Walz saying a lot of things that are accurate, but allowing people to persist with a misapprehension of the nature of his service. I could see some military guys getting a bit annoyed at that, but he didn't outright lie, I don't think. So I reckon you can get away with that. He didn't lie. Everything he said was accurate, even if he knew they had a misapprehension. So I reckon no harm, no foul, still. But then we have outright lies. He lied about his rank many times. On September the 7th, 2004, he was conditionally promoted to Command Sergeant Major. He held that role of Command Sergeant Major, but he hadn't completed the necessary requirements yet. He was supposed to complete those requirements after he attained the role to consolidate the role. He never completed those requirements because he was keen to get out the door the year after. So he returned to his original rank of Master Sergeant upon resignation. He was no longer a Command Sergeant Major. And that's a very prestigious rank. So people in the Army would care about that. But he kept on referring to himself to this day as Command Sergeant Major anyway. So let me give you some examples. This was an ad in his first congressional run.
Command Sergeant Major, retiring 4 years late after a tour supporting the war in Afghanistan.
His congressional Twitter bio said he was a Command Sergeant Major. To this day, it says that. It's still there. You can see it. He put out a congressional challenge coin. It's like a military thing with his rank engraved on the coin, and the rank was Command Sergeant Major. Walz's bio on the Minnesota government website still reads, after 24 years in the Army National Guard, Command Sergeant Major Walz retired from the 125th Field Artillery Battalion in 2005. His bio on Kamala Harris's campaign website said he was a retired Command Sergeant Major until this all blew up, and now they've changed it to be accurate, to say he served as a Command Sergeant Major. Now that's accurate. It's a very small difference to say he served as a Command Sergeant Major rather than he was a retired Command Sergeant Major. Very, very technical. But in my book, that is a deliberate, repeated lie from Tim Walz. He knows what he was saying was untrue. He was in the Army. The people in the Army, sorry, in the National Guard, the people in the National Guard are very aware of the difference of this. And look, I don't know why he did that, because it was of, like, people People don't care about his rank. Command Sergeant Major means nothing to a punter. It only means something to people in the army. The people in the punters would just respect his 24 years of service, and any rank they would respect. They'd have no problems with this. He gets nothing from calling himself a retired Command Sergeant Major. The only people who would understand what that means are the people who would be offended by that, because they would know that it's inaccurate if they knew the truth about Tim Walz. So to me, it was strange behaviour from him, but whatever. The fact is, it's the most minor possible lie. It is a lie, but you could not be more minor a lie. It's not like he made up the honour out of whole cloth. He did serve as a Command Sergeant Major. He can say that accurately. He just didn't retire as one. So that's very, very technical as a lie. It's still a lie, but very technical. I don't think any punters would give a stuff about that. It's more tricky rather than shocking to me, especially in the context of what we hear from politicians generally, and especially what we hear from the Trump-Vance ticket every single day. But look, I can understand why people from the military would care. They take this stuff seriously. But finally, here's the big issue. It's a different kind of issue to all that. The idea of him leaving his team in the lurch. Now, firstly, I'm going to ignore the most prominent voices in this story, like Tom Barrett. Some of Walz's old colleagues, like him, have made a big thing of this. Tom Barrett was the man who replaced him as Command Sergeant Major after Walz retired. To me, a lot of these people seem like partisan hacks, especially Tom Barrett. I want to look at the facts, and we can establish a number of facts. And there are other people I do trust more. February 10, 2005, Walz filed paperwork with the Federal Election Commission as a candidate for Congress. Okay? March 2005, he put out a statement. I do not yet know if my artillery unit will be part of this mobilisation, talking about Iraq, and I am unable to comment further on specifics of the deployment. As Command Sergeant Major, which he was at the time, I have a responsibility not only to ready my battalion for Iraq, but also to serve if called on. I am dedicated to serving my country to the best of my ability, whether that is in Washington, D.C. or in Iraq. I don't want to speculate on what shape my campaign will take if I'm deployed, but I have no plans to drop out of the race. I am fortunate to have a strong group of enthusiastic supporters and a very dedicated, intelligent wife. Both will be a major part of my campaign, whether I'm in Minnesota or Iraq. So he's not ruling out going to Iraq. He's saying, I am going to run for Congress no matter what happens. Okay, he's been very explicit about that. He's saying, I might go to Iraq, I might not. May 2005, so that's 2 months later, Tim Walz retires from the National Guard. July 2005, 2 months after that, his unit receives alert orders for deployment. September 2005, 2 months after that, the unit prepares for deployment. March 2006, a year after that statement before, the unit finally deployed. Okay, so did he resign? So he resigned clearly before he knew he was going to Iraq for sure, right? No, not right. Okay, firstly, we don't know exactly 100% when he decided to retire. We should say that. There's no document. We don't know. We also don't know 100% when he found out he was likely to be going to war in Iraq. We got a pretty good idea, though. Now, I should say, with the retirement thing, the National Guard currently recommends you begin planning for retirement 24 to 36 months before your intended retirement date, and it takes usually 90 days for the retirement request to be processed. So under those numbers, he would have retired. He would have prepared to retire or decided to retire long before there was any thought of going to Iraq. But apparently the dates have changed a lot. Like the process was much shorter back then, apparently. This is what we know, though. When he was talking to his mate, Al Bonnefeld, about resigning, he knew then that they were going to Iraq. Washington Post spoke to Al Bonnefeld, and this is his friend, okay? He's on his side. And Bonnefeld confided, and he confided in Bonnefeld that he was considering whether to leave their unit, so he hadn't made his mind up yet, even though it was preparing to go to war so he could run for Congress. So at that point in time, they knew they were preparing to go to war. Not everyone would go to war, but the commander definitely would. And he had the highest rank in that unit. So he would have been going, right? Bonnefeld said it was a very long conversation behind closed doors. He was trying to decide where he could do better for soldiers, for veterans, for the country. He weighed that for a long time. He said Walz appeared then to have no fear about the possibility of danger. He was not that kind of man. Absolutely not. Bonnefeld is a Democrat, we should say, but he said he thought Walz made the right career decision. He said, if I had the same choices, I probably would have done the same thing. Now, the most important, the most valuable quote, though, is from his old commander, who is Doug Julin. He turned up on CNN a few days ago. He strikes me as a guy who's not happy with Walz, but he struck me as fair. So I'm going to trust I believe his quotes. You don't have to believe him if you don't want, but I'm going to read you his quotes. Now, his problem with Walz was not that Walz retired. His problem was that he thought Walz was deliberately sneaky and underhand in the way he retired. That was his problem. He says that Walz found out back in 2004 that he was going to Iraq. In late 2004, he said they all found out that the unit was going to go in 2004, and he told the commanding officers at the time, including Tim Walz. In February 2005, he then said, quote, we had a meeting, and it was, he talked about a meeting they had where they talked about what was going to happen. When we had the meeting and it was over with, he asked to speak with me, and we sat down and spoke one-on-one. And that's where he informed me. He says, just to let you know, I have to put a bid in for Congress. I have not been selected yet. I have not been nominated yet, but I just want to let you know. Okay, so far so good. About a month later, by the way, the reason I'm reading this out rather than playing it is because there was lots of breakups. It was very poor audio, so it's just better than me reading it. About a month later, they had another meeting. And this is what Julin said then. Everybody was talking about what, when and where, what we were going to be doing, what our mission was coming up to be, how we were going to handle it, and how we needed to build the team. Again, this whole time period, we're doing what's called building a team to go forward to Iraq. After the meeting, Tim Walz came in and sat down with me because I'd talked to him before. And he said, I said, I need to know what his answer is at that time about whether he's going to go on or retire. He came in, we sat and talked. He told me, he says, I've not been nominated. I'm going forward with the battalion. Not nominated for Congress, that is. I'm going forward with the battalion to Iraq. I said, good, let's go. We got the team built and we're starting to build the team out there. Okay, so at this point, Julin thinks Walz is in for sure, going to Iraq. He then tells us the next bit, quote, a month lapsed or a little bit more lapsed, and in June, we went to Camp Ripley for our meeting again. I walked into the team, the meeting hall, and Tom Behrens was there, and I asked Tom what he was doing there. That's when he informed me that Walz had quit. The issue that came out of this was, first of all, how did Tim Walz quit without discussing with me? Because I was his next level of leadership. So he quit without telling Julin, and this is what annoys Julin the most, that Walz went over his head. Julin said, the other issue was that the individual that approved this was 2 levels higher than myself in the enlisted corps and should have had Tim Walz come back to me and talk to me about this and discuss this as to why he was going forward now or not going forward now after he'd already told me he was going forward. He went around me and above and beyond me and basically went to get somebody to back him, to get him out of there without... It was just a backdoor process that he handled against me or against the battalion out there. He went around me. And the fact is that there's a possibility he probably would have realized. I would have probably said, no, it's too late. You're going forward. Because we'd already received our notification of sourcing. And there's one other little point out there that people say, well, he hadn't been notified yet. Yes, he had been notified. So, this is what annoys Julin. He went around and he went over his head and around his back because he thought that Julin wouldn't let him go. So, Vance and some Republican dickheads are carrying on like Walz was a massive coward. They're saying, oh, he's so scared of going to Iraq. The stolen valor. They keep on saying stolen valor. That's not what happened. He wasn't being a coward. According to his commander, he was being selfish. He saw this opportunity to run for Congress and he wanted to take it. And that's not a surprise. That's a huge opportunity for a teacher. That's a huge promotion. And so he went behind his commander's back to make it happen. There was nothing wrong with Walz retiring around this point in time. He had served for 24 years. 4 years longer than the standard 20-year retirement. Julian's problem was not that he retired, it's what they didn't retire at the right time in their preparation, and that he'd already begun building their team, Julian. So Walz, rather than missing the opportunity to go to Congress, got sneaky and backstabbed his commander to get out of there. That was what Julian's problem was. He said he thought that Walz should have retired a couple of months earlier, and if he hadn't, he should have at least done it the right way to Julian's face. He thought that was what was dishonourable. Not cowardly, not a betrayal. He was allowed to retire. He was allowed to retire by the higher-ups, which means it's perfectly fine. He didn't go AWOL. It was just underhand. It wasn't honourable. He also, by the way, had support from at least one other soldier who knew Walz quite well, Joseph Eustace, who has anti-Walz posts on Facebook. Right now, he's a Republican. At least he seems to be a Republican. He was also a command sergeant major at the time. He said in 2022, Walz was a great soldier. When he chose to leave, he had every right to leave. Several other soldiers from Walz's unit have echoed that sentiment, including a former brigadier general. So, in conclusion, I think the basic answer to has Walz done something wrong is yes. I think he has done a lot of things that are wrong, but I think in the scheme of things, those wrong acts are very minor. And J.D. Vance in particular has way, way, way oversold them. To me, Walz showed the kind of morals you expect from a politician. And it wouldn't affect my vote at all. I doubt it would affect the vote of anyone who's not in the military. And by the way, that was Bill's view as well. He said, all of this is very technical. It's not going to affect anyone's vote whatsoever. Bill didn't really care about anything except for that one clip I played you before. He said everything else is just really technical and just splitting hairs. I think most people would react that way. All the concerns are too messy, too muddy, too technical. However, I can understand people in the military being pissed off with Walz. He does seem to have questionable ethics to me, as far as military ethics go, which are of the highest standard. But out of the four main characters up for election on the two tickets, Vance, Trump, Harris, and Walz, I still trust Tim Walz way more than the other three. Tim Walz is sneaky and underhand and dishonest by the highest standards in the army, but in the community and in politicians, he's still pretty bloody good. So that's my take on it. You can decide whatever you like. I'm out of time. So the next podcast I'm going to record with Dave on Friday. I'll put it out on Saturday to give this one a little bit of time to breathe. Until then, stay peppy.